Welcome back. Everybody had their break, bathroom, had a bite to eat. Luckily, I had everything prepared, so it was a good hot dog with mustard and garlic sauce and fried onions. It was good. Yeah, so I'm full. And 7 p.m. in Sweden. My dessert will be a beer or a few while we unfold this trial. And I have to get used to not saying words because this is new stream and we are beginning from the we are not beginning from the 2-hour marks, sadly. So yeah, hi, and some of you might miss, but almost the second I pressed end broadcast, and then I have to agree, that's when Lorax showed up. So we had a few minutes where we talked, and apparently Friday morning, US time, Friday afternoon my time, Lorax is having his F-It Friday. So Friday trial stream might be postponed. So I will go on a little longer now, Wednesday and Thursday, to make up for that. So yeah, at least 3 hours today. So we will get up to lunch, hopefully, on day 6. And then on Thursday, we will do afternoon of day 6 plus day 7. That way we can have Friday off and watch me get wasted on Legal Vices stream. What is garlic sauce? Well, it's one of these ready sauces. It is garlic and something runnier than garlic. It's excellent. Okay. Yeah, I see people are heading in here. I'm not sure. I wasn't sure that the redirect worked, but apparently it did, because here you all are, or at least a bunch of you. So yeah, I think the garlic sauce is one of these ready sauces that you can have on pizza, at least here in Sweden. You should have it over in the United States as well. It's amazing. Nom 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 nom. Nom 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 nom. And dessert. Yeah. But we are here for this. The start of day 6. Sound, start. And yeah, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, share the link on social media. And if you think, wow, this guy is good, please consider being a member. It's $3 a month, and you will get access to members-only content and to my Discord. All right, and tractor. Sound. Judge entering. Okay. So we are walking right into it.
Ms. Cunningham, are you ready to proceed?
I am, Your Honor. The state calls Matt Gahant to the stand.
Okay. Matt Dahant. Yeah, he's a cop.
If you'll raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the
Or
truth, the
ex-cop.
whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Dress for the occasion in baggy pants and that. Folks, dress for court. It's not hard. Just because there's not a jury, respect the process.
Please state your name for the record and spell both your first and your last name.
Matthew Gehant, Mattewgehant.
What is your occupation?
I'm Asset Protection Area Manager for Walmart Supply Chain.
How long have you been employed with Walmart?
Going on 19 years.
What do your responsibilities entail?
Currently, my responsibilities center around safety and compliance for the facility.
Okay. And then what specific location do you work out of?
It's Sterling, Illinois, DC 7024.
Okay,
Back
so
in
he's a
July of
Walmart
2020,
employee, and that
what
is
was
good.
the store that you were assigned to?
I was working at the Clinton, Iowa Walmart Supercenter, store 2889.
And then what was the nature of your position with the store at that time?
I was an asset protection manager. Main focus there was centered around security and preventing criminal activity, a little bit of safety, a little bit of compliance.
Now, I'd like to direct your attentions to the Walmart store there in Clinton. Where is that store located relative to Highway 30? And then when you come into town, where it transitions into Lincoln Way?
So it'd be just north of Lincoln Way and then off of South 25th Street.
All right. Does the parking lot of the business actually run along Lincoln Way on one side? And would that be to the south?
Why is it
The parking lot would be on the north side of Lincoln Way. And then there's a frontage road with a gas station in between.
Oh, absolutely. All right. That being said, could you describe for us the store itself? Does it have any video surveillance cameras affixed to it?
Yes, it does.
Where are video surveillance cameras affixed to the business?
We have several on the rooftops, several inside the facility, and then we have some that are actually built into the doorways of the facility, the entrance and the exit.
Okay. And then within the store itself, are there video surveillance cameras?
Yes.
What would be the positioning of video surveillance cameras throughout the store? And if you could speak specifically to the cash registers, I would appreciate that as well.
Yeah, so the cameras vary based off the store needs, but every point of sale, which would be every register in the facility, does have a camera dedicated to that specific register.
Okay. In the Walmart store at Clinton, if customers are checking out, are there checkout areas that are self-service?
That's correct.
And in those areas, are there surveillance cameras affixed to the registers that customers could use to check themselves out?
Yes, sir.
Walmart.
Now, the other topic that I'd like to discuss, for the video surveillance cameras outside the store, would they pick up any activity in the parking lot?
Yes, they would.
Do they also pick up activity of individuals approaching the store and entering the store?
Yes.
And then once the subject enters the store, can you basically determine that individual's movement throughout the store up to the point of checkout and departure?
That's correct.
I want to direct your attention to July 11th of 2020. Were you contacted by law enforcement officers of the Davenport Police Department?
Yes.
And what was the nature of that contact?
They basically just gave me a time frame, vehicle description, subject description, wanted to know if I had any video. They actually met me up at the store there, and we went to the security office where we reviewed video for those time frames.
Okay. As you sit on the stand today, do you recall the description for a vehicle of interest?
I recall it was a sedan. I don't remember the exact color or make or model.
Certainly. And then as far as the description for the subject of interest, do you recall that today?
Yeah.
Okay. And what do you recall about the subject of interest as far as physical descriptors?
It was a fairly large black male, described to be, somewhat medium height, but fairly largely built.
All right. And then beyond that, were you aware that law enforcement was investigating a report of a missing child that had occurred on July 10th of 2020 in Davenport, Iowa?
Yeah, once we started reviewing the video, that's where we started kind of discuss the specifics of what we were actually looking for and why we were looking for it.
Okay. Was July 10th then the date of focus?
Correct.
All right. And then did law enforcement indicate to you that they actually had a time that they wanted to focus on based on a pinging of a cell phone associated with the subject of interest?
How would you know about
Yeah,
cell
they
phone ping?
didn't share a whole lot of specifics for the reason why.
I mean, seriously, why does he have to know about the pinging of a phone? He's not there for the pinging of the phone. Oh, this prosecutor just overshares with something that is not necessary for this guy.
The time frame, but they did have a pretty narrow time frame that they wanted to look at.
Okay. And what would be that time frame as it relates to the time the store opens up?
So I believe it was approximately between 6:30 a.m. and 7 a.m. was the time frame I was given. That was kind of right during the time of COVID, so our store actually changed its hours during that time frame, and we didn't open until 7 a.m. We're generally a 24-hour facility prior to that.
All right. Did you have an opportunity to sit with the officer who came and reviewed video surveillance camera for the time frame of 6:30 to 7 a.m. on July 10th of 2020?
Yes.
Did the officer then identify a subject of interest and a transaction that he observed taking place at one of the checkout stands?
Yes.
Were you requested to obtain the receipt for that transaction?
Yes.
And then how is it that you're able to identify what receipt would belong to the purchase made by that subject of interest?
So basically, you would just match up the time frame for that specific camera. So I recall it was a self-checkout camera, so I'd find that register number, reference that to the camera system, and then reference that to our electronic journal. Our electronic journal is where all of our store receipts are tracked digitally, electronically. And then basically you would match up the timestamp associated with that camera shot versus what the journal was showing, and that would provide the receipt. You would also match up the items that are being purchased and compare them to what you're seeing on the electronic journal.
As you watched the video surveillance footage, could you see what items the subject was purchasing?
Yes.
And what items was the subject purchasing?
It was 2 bottles of bleach.
Okay. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibit 87.
This is the
May I approach the
foundation
witness?
that was needed for 2.5
I'm
hours.
handing you what's been
of-
marked as State's Exhibit 87 for purposes of identification. I'd like for you to look at that exhibit and tell me if you recognize that exhibit.
Yeah, that'd be the copy that I provided to the police department.
Okay. Is that the receipt for the subject of interest that purchased those 2 bottles of Clorox?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce
Or-
State's Exhibit 87 into the record.
Exhibit 87 is admitted.
Mr. Gahant, and I'm saying your name incorrectly. Can you pronounce that for me?
It's Jahant.
Jahant, there we go. Mr. Jahant, can you tell us what the date is on State's Exhibit 87?
It'd be July 10th of 2020.
What was the time of the purchase?
It'd be 7:08 a.m.
And then what are the items documented as being purchased?
So it's 2 bottles of bleach, 81 ounce, same SKU, $4.42 at retail.
Okay. And how did the subject of interest pay for those two 81-ounce bottles of bleach?
I paid with cash.
Did that conclude your involvement in this matter? And actually, let me just rephrase that question. Were you also involved in turning over copies of the activity that was observed on video surveillance cameras, both outside and inside the store?
That is correct.
And was that associated with this subject of interest and the vehicle of interest?
Yes.
Did that conclude your involvement in this matter?
Yes.
Your Honor, I have no further questions of this witness.
Mr. Freeze?
Sir, the time at 7:08 a.m., that's the time the transaction actually occurred?
Yeah, so that time actually generates from the second that that receipt prints. That's the timestamp that it puts on it.
Okay. So we can assume that that's the time the gentleman who purchased these items was leaving the store, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you said this is Clorox bleach. You know that?
I don't recall. It looks like it's Clorox by the description, but I don't know the exact brand.
Okay. And we know this is from your store because it says ST number 2889 in the upper left-hand corner.
That's correct.
And that's the store identifier?
Yes.
That's all I have.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
You may
Okay.
step down. Thank you.
This is the amount of time they should have used on every witness, every officer yesterday. Well, not yesterday, but trial day yesterday. Sorry. Yeah, she found her out. She finds her outfit after she watches an episode of a 1980s Falcon Crest Dynasty, Time of Our Life. Then she searches the bins of the charity shop, and that's her dresses. And her hairstyle. Oh, sorry. I mean, remember from last stream, she tried to get that receipt from someone else, and she wasn't able to.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please have a seat. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Can you please state and spell your name for the record?
My name is Monique Burlhart. My first name is spelled Monique. My last name is spelled Brillhart.
And how are you currently employed?
I'm employed by the FBI Laboratory Latent Print Operations Unit.
How long have you worked for the FBI Laboratory?
I have worked for the FBI Laboratory for 19 years.
And have you always worked in the latent print department?
Yes.
What are your duties in the latent print department for the FBI?
So as a latent print examiner, I receive items of evidence for the detection and development of latent
I
prints.
saw it. Thank
Any
you so
latent
much,
prints
Dennis.
that I am
Thank you
able
so
to
much for
detect
your,
or develop,
PayPal
I will then
donation.
compare to the known prints of individuals that are either submitted by a contributing agency or obtained through the FBI's fingerprint database.
Can you describe your educational background and the training that you've received in order to hold your position?
I received a Bachelor of Science degree in biology with a concentration in criminalistics from York College of Pennsylvania, which is located in York, Pennsylvania. I also received a Master's of Science degree in biotechnology with a concentration in weapons of mass destruction from the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland.
And from there, once you began your employment with the FBI, did you engage in any further training specific to latent fingerprints?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe that for us?
So my training at the FBI Laboratory consisted of approximately a 2-year training program. And that training program consisted of classroom lectures, examinations, both written tests, comparison examinations, comparison exercises, oral boards, presentations, and moot courts. And at the completion of my training, I successfully passed a full comprehensive qualification examination.
Do you have to engage in any sort of continuing education or ongoing training in order to hold your position as well?
Yes.
And what does that entail?
So each year we are required to participate in a certain number of hours of continuing education
I can
in our
send
discipline. And additionally,
an invite.
in addition to that, I also am required to successfully pass a proficiency examination every year.
And have you passed every year?
Yes.
Ms. Brillhart, what are latent fingerprints?
So on the palmar surfaces of your hand, as well as the soles of your feet, there are raised portions of skin known as friction ridges. And those friction ridges exude sweat. So when you touch an item, you may leave an impression of that friction ridge arrangement on the item. Many times latent prints are not visible to the naked eye. So they require different light sources, chemicals, or fingerprint powders to be able to visualize them.
So when you are provided an item in your lab with the goal of trying to see if there's any sort of latent fingerprints or friction ridges on that item, how do you begin examining it?
So the first thing that I consider is what kind of item is it? For example, is it a porous item such as paper? So paper is a porous item in which the sweat that may be present on the friction ridges would soak into the item. Or is it a non-porous item, such as something that is smooth, like plastic or glass, in which the friction ridges would be essentially on top of the item? That will then be the driving force of determining what different chemical methods that I will use to then develop latent prints.
And how does the process differ based on whether it's a porous item versus a non-porous item?
So for example, if I have a piece of paper, I will start with just a general visual examination, followed up by various light sources, such as a laser light, looking for any latent prints that may inherently fluoresce. Some latent prints are able to do that based on the composition of the sweat. Following that, I will use a chemical known as indane, which is used on paper, and then following that up with a process known as physical developer. Now, how that differs from non-porous items, in that with a non-porous item, I still do a visual examination with oblique lighting, looking for any latent prints that might be detected. Then a light source, such as a laser light. The difference here now is I will use superglue fuming, in which I will place the item into a superglue fuming chamber. I will use liquid superglue, burn the superglue to create essentially a smoke that adheres to any moisture on the item, such as latent print residue. And at the completion of superglue fuming, I apply a dye stain, which allows me to visualize any latent prints that are coated with that dye stain under the laser light.
Based on your training and experience, are there certain items that you're more likely to find latent fingerprints on versus other items?
It just depends. It's no
And to the surprise of no one, they
there's
will
no
find
real number to
heaviest
that or anything,
fingerprint
but in general
based on his
terms,
own items.
paper, because when you touch a piece of paper and the residue is able to soak directly into the paper, and you cannot rub the latent print off because it's inside the paper itself, as opposed to something that is non-porous, in which when you touch the item, the friction ridges are on top of the item. They are more easily damaged in general terms, just because of the nature of those types of items.
So I understand a porous item seems to absorb the fingerprint. It would potentially maintain it maybe a little better than a non-porous item where the friction ridges just kind of sit on top.
Correct.
Which would make it easier to be damaged or wiped away or something along those lines.
Yes.
Now, once you have an item and you've gone through your process of trying to see if there are any fingerprints, latent fingerprints on that item. If you do make some sort of identification, does that necessarily mean that that print or whatever it is that you have found would be usable for later identifications?
So as I'm processing items of evidence, if I do detect friction ridge development, I will then photograph that particular latent print to then determine if there is enough quality and quantity of information within that latent print to then drive it to the next step, which would move into a comparison stage to a particular individual.
What type of quality or quantity is required in order to then compare to a known latent fingerprint?
So every latent print is different. Essentially, as I am conducting my examination of any latent prints that are detected, I start with an analysis step where essentially I am looking at the overall ridge flow of that latent print, determining if it's clear enough, if there are enough features within that latent print where I would feel as though I would be able to essentially make an identification decision at the end of my examination. So it's very case dependent, latent print to latent print, but essentially it is looking at all the information contained in that latent print to determine whether or not I would be able to compare to an individual and ultimately reach an identification decision.
Is there a difference between locating some friction ridge detail and determining that it's just not suitable for comparison versus not finding anything at all?
Yes, that does occur. There are times in which I will examine items of evidence and I will see no friction ridge development whatsoever. And there are times in which I will see some friction ridge development. It may or may not be able to be used, to the other spectrum of, yes, there is enough information that it can drive to the comparison step and ultimately would be able to be identified to a particular individual.
In situations where you are presented with an object where there's information that you know somebody had contact with this object, would you expect to find friction ridge detail every single time?
No, I would not.
Why not?
There are many factors involved in touching an item and not leaving a latent print behind. For example, the weather outside. If it's very cold outside, your friction ridges tend not to want to produce sweat and produce that sweat on the friction ridges of the finger. So when you touch an item, you may not leave that impression. Whereas if it's really hot outside, alternatively, you may be sweating a lot, you may touch the item, but it may smear a lot if it's like on a non-porous item. There are conditions outside weather, if it rained on a particular item of evidence, if someone were wearing gloves. I talked about non-porous items in which the latent prints are actually on top of the item. It's very easy to damage those by wiping them away because the friction ridges are setting on top. There can also be factors involved with just the skin condition of an individual. When we are younger, our friction ridges tend to be more plump. It allows the friction ridges to come in contact a little more easy with an item, as opposed to as we age, our friction ridges tend to flatten out as it's the normal aging process, which can prevent some of that contact as well. Also an occupation of an individual, if someone is using their hands a lot, maybe a bricklayer, for example, they may wear down those ridges, which could make that a little more difficult to leave a latent print. So there are various environmental factors that can occur with leaving latent prints.
Now, you did mention if somebody has wiped down an item, that could potentially affect your ability to find any latent prints. Would, along those same lines, cleaning or using bleach or some sort of cleaner like that also affect your ability to find latent prints?
Yes, especially with the non-porous items, being that the latent print is on top of the item, that would have an effect.
When you are examining items, do you have the ability yourself to do any sort of testing to see if an item has been cleaned prior to that item being presented to you?
No.
Do you have the ability to test any specific items to see if bleach has been used on that item?
No, I do not.
Once you have completed your
We didn't
examination on a
expect
specific
that
item and you
answer.
do find that there are usable latent fingerprints, how would you then compare that item to a known latent fingerprint?
So after I determine, based on my full analysis of a latent print, that there is enough information contained within that latent print to move to the comparison step, I will then determine if an individual, if I was asked to compare an actual individual to any latent prints in that submission. And if I am, then I will retrieve that known card if
And
I am
I know the
able
law
from our
and
fingerprint
Seawood
database. It's a
just
repository
does
of
not
fingerprints.
agree. They
If I am
think
not presented with an
everything is
individual to compare, I
top-notch,
would then search
but
that
that's what you
into our
get
fingerprint
when
database in an attempt to make an
your
identification.
key audience is box wine moms.
And so once you are able to determine, or if you are provided with that known fingerprint, what's your process for comparing the known with what you found on an item?
So following that analysis step in which I determine that I'm able to do that comparison, I will then set the latent print and the known print side by side. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the same general ridge flow of the friction ridges of that print. I am also looking for particular levels of detail within the print that I examined and I determined during my analysis step, such as a dividing ridge, which is a ridge that continues and then divides like a fork in a road, or an ending ridge, which is a ridge that continues and then stops, or a dot, which is a ridge that is as
And as
wide
it
as
turns
it is thick.
out,
So what I'm doing is I'm looking
action
for those
science,
characteristics that I observed during my
very
analysis in the
many
latent
people
print,
have the same
and looking for the
type
same
of
characteristic of the same
fingerprints.
type,
So
same
if
location,
you
and the same
use
spatial
too few
location and
markers,
direction within the known print
it's
to
not
determine whether or
you
not
only
those two prints
exclude.
are sharing
not
the same
include.
features. So essentially, if you think of a constellation in the
So
sky
it
like the
will
Big
be
Dipper,
interesting
I'm
to
looking
see
for
what
those
she will
features in
say
that
about
same
this.
spatial arrangement. As I continue on with my comparison, at the end of my comparison, I then make a determination whether or not this is an identification, meaning that I am finding strong support for these features in agreement, or an exclusion decision where I'm finding strong support for the features not in agreement, or an inconclusive in which I am unable to determine based on the information that I am presented.
Okay, what I said was, as it turns out, due to actual science done, there are plenty of people that have the same key type of fingerprint. So if you use too few markers to determine something, you can only exclude, not include. That is why fingerprints isn't as important anymore when it comes to evidentiary value.
I apologize if you've already said this, but does every individual have their own unique set of fingerprints or for their hands or feet?
Yes, they do.
So similarly to DNA, if you do find
No.
an inclusive fingerprint.
Oh God. It all depends on how many markers, because if it's only a partial fingerprint and only 3 or 4 markers, that should only exclude, never include. So it's not similar to DNA. Jesus Christ. Is this 20 years ago?
Are you able to then say that fingerprint is most likely belonging to this person on this item?
If I am able to find enough information in agreement, it will drive strong support for an identification, meaning that that would be that individual's fingerprint, yes.
Now, regarding this particular case, were you provided certain items to examine?
Yes.
And were you provided those items sometime in between July and August 14th of 2020?
Yes.
And is it common practice for you to author a report of your findings?
Yes, it is.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm showing you what's been marked here as State's Exhibit 48. Do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes, I do.
And what is State's Exhibit 48?
This is my official latent print report.
And is this a fair and accurate copy of the report you've authored regarding your findings of the items provided to you for this particular incident?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, the state would offer Exhibit 48 into evidence.
No objection.
Exhibit 48 is admitted.
May I publish, Your Honor?
You may.
This would be interesting. Here's what I want to hear. I want to hear her testify sorry, to the actual number of markers she concluded her opinion on. Because if she only offers an opinion about, oh, I found enough, that's not enough, for me at least. You have to actually say, we found this many markers that, sorry, that is an exact copy or similar. Or I need numbers. I don't care about opinions. We know that from the Zachariah Anderson case, when the DNA expert refused to use numbers, like in 1 in a bazillion and 1 in a quintillion and 1. She just offered, oh, it's my opinion. I don't care about a scientist's opinion. I want numbers. I want facts, not opinions.
Sorry. Okay. Showing you then page 1 of States Exhibit 48. I think there's a way to zoom here. Okay, so just starting here at the top, there appears to be a lab number at the top of this report. Is that the lab number that the FBI lab would have assigned to this case?
Yes.
There was also a date here listed of July 22nd, 2020. What is that date in reference to?
The communication date refers to the laboratory examine request, the laboratory examination request from the field office.
And then, see, shifting over, I have to zoom out. At the top of the report here, there's a date of August 14th, 2020. What is that date in reference to?
That date is in reference to the date I authored the report.
So listed out here under the FBI laboratory evidence designators, what are all those items that we see listed?
All the items listed are what I received for latent print examinations.
Now, all of those items have been assigned an item number. Where does that number come from?
That number is assigned at the FBI laboratory. As items of evidence come in for a submission, we will then assign the number sequentially in that particular case.
So just for example, looking first at item number 19, there appears to then be a description of that item. Where did that description come from?
That description is actually determined by our evidence management unit. As they inventory items of evidence that come into the laboratory, that would come from the field office or whoever our contributor was. Those particular descriptions, though, are determined by our evidence management unit.
And as you've indicated, usually from the field office, who would have provided that item to you?
Yes.
So then next to the description,
So these is
in the
items we
parentheses,
know was in
there
proximity
appears to be
of
several series of numbers. What
Mr.
is that?
Dinkins.
So a 1B number and then the E number, which is a barcode, those are very specific numbers for field offices in regards to their evidence that they are submitting.
So my understanding then is, so just looking at the top item there, item 19, that would be the lab number for the hatchet from the trunk of the 2007 Chevy Impala. But the number right next to that, the 1B2, that would be the field office identification number for that item.
That is correct. They use that as a tracking mechanism.
So and then looking at all of these items, can you just go through each of the items that you would have tested and what the results were?
Sure. So item 19 is a hatchet from trunk of 2007 Chevrolet Impala. I did not develop any latent prints on this item. Item 19-1, blade cover from item 19. I did not develop any latent prints on this item. Item 47, machete from on top of microwave at 743 Schmidt Road. I did not develop latent prints on this item. Item 48, machete. I did not develop latent prints on this item. Item 48-1, sheath with item 48. I did not develop latent prints on this item. Item 49, broom from kitchen at 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8. I did develop one latent impression on this item. Item 52, bottle with cap and liquid contents from 2744 East 53rd Street. I did not develop latent prints on this item.
So item 48, what you have listed here as a machete, or the FBI evidence item 1B58, though it might not be very clear, did that appear to be this blue and black machete, if you recall?
I don't recall.
Okay. And then item number 52, bottle cap with liquid contents from 2744 East 53rd Street. Do you recall if that would have been a container of bleach?
I do not recall.
Okay. In any event, the only item in which you were able to develop a usable latent fingerprint was the item 49, the broom, located at 2744 East 53rd Street.
Correct.
Now, all of the items that were listed here, would you consider these items to be the porous items, the type that absorb fingerprints, or non-porous, the type where the prints are more easily damaged?
These are non-porous items in which the print is on top of the item.
So nothing out
You've
of the
said that,
order.
or testified here that you were not
Nothing.
able to identify any usable prints. Does that mean, or from your recollection, that you didn't see any prints at all for these items, or were there things that you found, they just were not usable?
I think what I do recall is that I didn't see any friction ridge development on any of the items except for the broom, in which I did develop an actual latent impression on that item.
So with the exception of item 49, you did not observe any friction ridge detail on any of the other items that were provided to you?
Correct, just item 49.
So nothing out of the ordinary.
Were you provided a known
Hard
latent
areas
print
are hard to
latent
get
print
prints
for
from.
comparison in this case?
Do you mean a known fingerprint card for an individual?
Yes.
I was provided with a person of interest with a FBI number identifier, which allows me to then pull any known records if needed for comparison.
And in this particular case, was the individual you would have compared a known record to identified as Henry Dinkins?
Yes.
So turning then to page 2 of your report, specifically then for item number 49, were you able to compare that your usable latent fingerprint to the known record for Henry Dinkins?
Yes.
And what were the results of that comparison?
Mr. Dinkins was excluded from the latent impression that was detected on item 49.
Okay. From the broom. Shocker.
So again, and going back to those other items that you had attempted to locate any sort of usable friction ridge detail, again, were those the types of items that, because of their non-porous nature, it just may be more difficult for you to locate those any usable prints?
Yes, because the latent prints that are on non-porous items, they tend to be more fragile just because they are setting on top of the surface. So it is easy to damage those latent prints.
And if somebody had wiped those items down or cleaned those items,
But
that would have also affected your ability to find any prints on those items?
Yes.
you have to prove that.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
That's just insinuation.
Thank you.
which
Good morning.
is
Morning.
Garbage.
So, Ms. Brillhart, you were brought here from the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, right?
Yes.
And just so I can summarize, you were able to give one print off this kitchen broom, correct?
Yes.
And that print excluded Mr. Dinkins, right?
Yes.
So to summarize your testimony here today, you were brought here from the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, to tell us that the one print you were able to examine excluded Mr. Dinkins, right?
I think so. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, you were able to examine one print and compare it, right?
Yes.
And that one print excluded Mr. Dinkins, correct?
Yes.
And you were asked to try to find latent prints on a hatchet, correct?
Yes.
And the blade cover from that hatchet, correct?
Yes.
And 2 machetes, correct?
Yes.
And a sheath from one of the machetes, correct?
Yes.
And there were no prints on those.
That is correct.
So you came here from Quantico, Virginia to tell us there was no prints on any of this stuff for Henry Dinkins.
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Ms. O'Donnell,
Nothing based on that, Your Honor.
give me a second.
Yeah, good call. They wanted her there to insinuate that they were wiped down. That's it. That's horrible prosecution. Referring to that. Jesus.
Ms. Cunningham, you may call your
At
next
least
witness.
it was
Your
short
Honor, the
and
state
sweet.
calls FBI analyst Linda Otterstatter.
Yeah, the prosecution spends money on absolute garbage in this case. And her testimony could have been on a piece of paper stipulated to. Instead, they
Do you
spent
swear to
money
tell
on
the
that.
truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please have a seat.
Ah, redhead! But also a fed. Not an actual redhead, but hey.
Thank you.
You may proceed, Ms. Cunningham.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please state your name for the record and spell both your first and your last name.
My name is Linda Otterstatter, spelled LindaOtterer.
What is your occupation?
I am a physical scientist, forensic examiner with the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia.
How long have you been employed with the FBI?
Approximately 17 years.
Could you describe your prior educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York. I've also taken chemistry coursework from Colorado State University, as well as criminalistics coursework from the Metropolitan State College of Denver, Colorado.
When did you complete your formal education?
I received my Bachelor of Science degree from Syracuse University in 1996.
All right. And then once you completed your formal education, is that when your career with the FBI commenced? Or did
No.
you have prior employment experience?
Before working for the FBI, I was a trace evidence forensic scientist for the Wyoming State Crime Lab in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
And then what type of work did you do for the Wyoming State Crime Lab?
I was a trace evidence examiner specializing in hairs, fibers, fabric, and cordage evidence. I also was responsible for the processing of crime scenes throughout the state of Wyoming.
How long were you employed as an analyst for Wyoming State Crime Lab?
6 years.
Okay. And then so in total, how much experience do you have in this field?
Between Wyoming and the FBI, a total of approximately 23 years.
Can you describe the specialized training that you've received related to the scientific field that you work in?
I successfully completed the FBI Laboratory Examiner Training Program under the direction and instruction of examiners that are qualified in the field. This entailed hair, fiber, fabric, and cordage examinations, our tests, supervised casework, oral board examination, and competency tests. I also completed a similar training program at the Wyoming State Crime Laboratory.
Okay. And then do you go through regular training throughout the course of your career?
Yes, I do. I've completed numerous training classes and courses over the past 23 years.
Okay. All right, Ms. Otterstatter, do you have a PowerPoint that we're going to present, which helps us understand the nature of the work that you do there at the FBI laboratory?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel Mr. Mark the State's Exhibit number 47. May I approach the witness?
You may.
I'm handing you Mr. Mark the
Which
State's Exhibit 47.
prosecution could have done
Do you recognize
with
this
all of
exhibit
their
47?
presentations instead of
Yes, I do.
sketching on a
Recognize this
whiteboard.
exhibit.
I recognize it because it is the PowerPoint presentation I created by examining the slides.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit number 47.
No objection.
Exhibit 47 is admitted.
May I publish this exhibit as we go through our expert testimony, Your Honor?
You may.
Okay. Now, directing your attention to page 1 of this exhibit, very simply, what do we see here?
This was the title slide saying that it's FBI Laboratory Trace Evidence Unit presentation, and I work in the hair and fiber group.
Okay, and then I'm going to bring this down a little bit so we have the ability to see everything. Going to page 2.
If you have a
Do you
PowerPoint
define
presentation,
for us what trace
why
evidence
is this
is?
on
Yes.
that?
What is trace evidence?
Trace evidence can be defined as debris that is small in size that can be transferred from one location to another.
All right. And then why are trace examination?
She prepared a PowerPoint, which would have been so easy to just bring out on a screen. Instead, she had to print every page out so the prosecution could turn the page. Oh.
Examinations conducted.
The reason why trace evidence examinations are conducted is based upon Locard's principle of exchange, which states that when two people or person and object come into contact, trace evidence such as hairs and fibers may be exchanged.
Okay.
So by examining hairs and fibers collected from items of evidence, it can be determined whether or not a possible association exists between those two people or person and an object.
Now you use the language.
I have to address something here. See, Sauder, If you watched my previous stream, we saw the body cam footage. And in there were different statements from the defendant, from the ex-girlfriend, and from the son. These were changed they changed the testimony from what they said there to what was presented in trial. So this is still who do you believe? Do you believe what they said in direct proximity, or what they said later on? So it is somewhat contested if they actually were together. So that is contested by the defense. Now, I agree with you. Everything points to this guy, every circumstantial evidence. The thing is, the prosecution needs to prove every element beyond reasonable doubt. And I'm not entirely convinced right now that they can prove it. Do I believe that it happened? Yes. But this is trial. They have to prove it as well. And that's infuriating because they should be able to do that really, really easy. And they're making it so hard.
That there may be an exchange. Is that an absolute if individuals come into contact with one another?
There could be a transfer. It is possible that there may not be a transfer of hairs and fibers.
Okay, and then when we talk about hairs and fibers, just given the nature of hairs and fibers, is that something that, say, for example, it transfers to a surface that it can easily fall away from that surface?
Yes, that is possible.
Give us examples of what type of activity could cause a hair or fiber to fall away from a surface.
Well, I can't say, I can't give definite, but I suppose that if my hair, for instance, as I'm sitting here, fell off and fell onto the desk here, me getting up and brushing against it, or if there's air conditioning or whatever, that it could possibly fall off that surface and onto the floor.
Okay, going to page 4, do you explain for us then what trace evidence you deal with there within your unit?
This is some examples of trace evidence that we examine in the hair and fiber group. Examples can include hairs, fibers, fabric, and cordage evidence.
Okay. Let's speak about cordage. What do you mean by cordage?
Cordage is a collective term used to refer to such items as rope and twine, for example.
All right. Now on page 5, how are examinations conducted relative to hair?
Well, today's presentation will be focusing on hairs and fibers. So I'll start by defining what a hair is. And a hair is a slender thread-like outgrowth from the skin of mammals.
And then when we talk about a hair itself, what is a hair constructed of?
So pictured here on slide 5 is a cross-sectional diagram of a hair shaft, which illustrates 3 anatomical regions that comprise the hair. That consists of the cuticle, which is the outer layer of the hair, comprised of overlapping scales, sort of like shingles on a roof. The main body of the hair is the cortex, which contains such things as the pigment granules, and the medulla is the central core of cells running through the center of the hair shaft.
Going to our next slide. How are hair examinations conducted?
The way hair examinations are conducted can be described in a series of steps as listed here. The first step being processing, which involves the collection of trace evidence from items of evidence. The next step involves the identification and characterization of hairs, followed by high magnification comparison microscopy, and followed by preparation of DNA analysis as appropriate. And this is just a summary, so there's additional slides coming up just describing these a little bit more.
Each of those steps? Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. All right, now, as we go to page 7 then, are you going to provide for us essentially an explanation as to how you would process items of evidence for hairs or fibers?
Yeah, items of evidence in the laboratory are examined in specialized processing rooms within the trace evidence unit at the FBI laboratory. Rooms are thoroughly cleaned prior to use. Items from the victim, suspect, and crime scene are processed in different rooms or on different dates to avoid cross-contamination. And protective clothing such as gloves, hair nets, and lab coats are used and also changed prior to processing items from different individuals or scenes.
In page 8, can you describe the various processing techniques that exist for purposes of collecting these items and being able to analyze them?
There are various methods employed that hairs and fibers can be collected using. Pictured in the upper left-hand corner is tape lifting. In the upper right-hand corner is vacuuming, where a specialized vacuum filter is used to collect hairs and fibers. In the bottom right-hand corner, there is what's called scraping, and this is showing, let's take a shirt, for example. If a shirt is an item of evidence, it is hung on a bar over clean brown paper, and a metal spatula is used to gently scrape the shirt, pictured here, and dislodge any foreign hairs and fibers from that item onto the clean brown paper.
Let me just take that a step further if I could. Does the item come into the laboratory? And let's use a shirt, for example, since that's what we're seeing here in your PowerPoint. Do you receive that short and then you go through the process of trying to locate potential hairs or fibers?
Yes.
Okay, so that doesn't happen out in the field. It's simply coming to you to determine whether or not there's a hair or fiber present.
In general, that is our procedure to collect it ourselves. There are times where there may be trace evidence that's collected from an item that is packaged separately, but in general, that's how we process.
Let me throw an example out. During the course of the investigation in this particular matter, there was a vehicle of interest, an RV, and between the top foam mat and the bottom foam mat, there were like, for example, a long piece of hair. Would that be an instance where field agents then would collect that hair or fiber and then package that up for purposes of examination?
That is a possible way that they could do it, yes.
Okay. But in most instances, it's an article that's coming in that you are going to process to see if you can identify whether or not there are hair or fibers present?
Yes.
All right. Because an article is submitted to the laboratory for you to process for hair or fibers, does that necessarily mean that the field agent has observed that, or are they simply taking
is barely visible to the unaided eye? On the previous slide, after
of hairs?
And
this is just how we do it. Let's move forward to
what type of antidote
do something.
characteristics.
Hair. Was that what we had discussed earlier when we talked about the outside of the hair?
Jesus Christ.
What would run 12
Of African characters, for usually that is usually European.
Let's hair. They are
From pubic is a buffer.
Located.
Hairs that are suitable for meaningful microscopic comparison purposes include head hairs and pubic hairs with sufficient microscopic characteristics.
And then let me stop you there. If you could define what is required for there to be sufficient microscopic characteristics, what are you looking for?
I'm looking for all of the characteristics present in the 3 anatomical regions of the hair. I also need to make sure there also needs to be enough hair or same microscopic of the body. Where like they are all, an example would be short hair.
As for their pubic hair.
Correct.
Okay. Going to page 15 of the PowerPoint presentation. How do you do the
So different to produce.
hair?
This is actually
So
foundational.
the microscopic comparison
DNA
must be conducted
collection.
with hairs from the same body area. For example, a question hair has to be compared to a known head hair.
That she is an expert in this and she is the one doing the testing should already be done pre-trial. She's just in there. Did you collect from these clothes, from these items, blah, 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 blah? Yes. What did you find? Da, 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 da.
All right.
And
Look at Joe on putting a hair to a known hair sample.
green is conducted. There are 3 possible. This is example.
Conclusion. Does that mean that they are then go to page 18 so that we can discuss that concept?
Of the Scott and microscopic hair.
Is
a
that a good example
all abortion now.
of characteristics? Give us an example of what would
One,
that you cannot either make it a determination.
for example, the arrangement of pigments, something that you have to use a microscope to examine.
Are there times then that you cannot either make it a determination about an inclusion or an exclusion?
Yes, the final conclusion option is an inconclusive, and this states for the no.
All right, now on page 19 of your PowerPoint, can you explain to us what you are talking about when you talk about blind verification? You look at as to whether or not you might submit hairs for DNA analysis.
There are many potential factors in cold cases where there was never a known sample to begin with. Sometimes that is requested for hairs to go to DNA.
Okay, going to page 20 of your PowerPoint. Now, are we switching our discussion from hairs to fibers?
Yes, the next section is discussing fiber evidence, and I want to start by defining what a fiber is. A fiber evidence is otherwise known as MSP, examinations.
Okay. Page 22 explains
is where
And it looks like you're moving to another topic. So we'll be in adjournment for approximately 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Christ. Seriously, what the F? That was just, okay, this is how we collect. This is how, none of it necessary. To testify, did you collect? Yes. What did you find? This. Holy please make it worthwhile. Fun thing is, this will speed up so we can get closer to being actually live with the trial. That's the only good thing about, oh, Jesus Christ.
Going to page 24 of your PowerPoint, could you please explain to us polarized light microscopy? There we go. I'm sorry, that doesn't come out very easily. Go ahead.
So if there are no differences at the comparison microscopy point, then I move on to polarized light microscopy. And this is done using a different microscope that is equipped with two polarizing filters, one below the stage.
So please explain to us then fluorescence.
Illuminated
What we see with the fluorescence.
stream.
If we move on to the next stage,
Spectra.
And we're seeing. Let's use the acronym of FTIR.
These are the methods, but how they measure.
Known fiber sample, and accordingly is not consistent with originating from the known sample. The next one is an inclusion, which is that if the question fiber exhibits the same microscopic characteristics and optical properties as the known sample, it can be concluded that the fiber is consistent with originating from the known sample or from another source comprised of fibers that exhibit the same. The final should do two.
What is it?
And then the two that same. This is just the ending slide saying that it was
I think that
created
was
for the FBI Laboratory Division
tour
Trace
of
Evidence
just-
Unit in the hair and fiber group.
Okay, thank you.
This is
Now, Ms. Otterstatter, are you familiar with an investigation that was conducted by the Davenport Police Department involving a missing child identified as Breasia Tyrrell with a subject of interest by the name of Henry
I know why
Dinkins?
it is.
Yes, I am.
Retrial.
How are you familiar with that
So
investigation?
much crap.
I received items of evidence for examination purposes.
Okay, and then with respect to the items of evidence that you received, did you prepare a laboratory report setting forth the findings of any type of trace analysis that you did of hair and fibers?
Yes, I did.
All right. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel, or well, give me a moment here.
Yeah, if you want to know more about that, we can check a YouTube video about that. We all can.
May the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 45 for purposes of identification. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 45 for purposes of identification. I want you to look at that report and tell me if you recognize that report.
Yes, I do. I recognize it by the laboratory markings and my signature block.
How is this document captioned at the top?
The title of the document is Laboratory Report.
Okay. And then does it identify who the special agent was that was responsible for directing items of evidence to the laboratory for analysis?
Yes, it does.
Who is that individual?
That's James McMillan, Special Agent out of the Omaha Field Office.
All right. Does it give us a date for when this laboratory report was
It might also
generated?
be the
Yes.
judge
What was the date that this
who
lab report was
actually
generated?
demolished this.
August 5th, 2020.
Okay. Now, for any type of investigation opened by a law enforcement agency, does each law enforcement agency assign an investigative number to that investigation?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, who issues or develops a FBI case identification number.
Okay. And does this particular document include the case identification number that was assigned to the investigation of Breasia Tyrrell?
Yes, it does.
Could you read that into our record?
It is OM-3290265.
And would you agree?
I just want to say to you, my audience, thank you so much for staying with me during what the prosecution is up to with so much unnecessary information that could be stipulated to by both parties, and then just get to the freaking point. Finally, we seem to be at the actual evidence part of this.
Agree with me that that number is going to be different than the investigative report number that the Davenport Police Department would assign to any records that they're generating?
I would assume so.
All right. And then if there are submissions of items of evidence by the FBI to the FBI laboratory in Quantico, does the laboratory generate its own report or laboratory number?
Yes, it does. The FBI laboratory generates its own laboratory number.
For this particular investigation, what was the laboratory report number that was assigned?
Well, it's not necessarily a laboratory report number, but it's an FBI laboratory number, a
Okay,
case
that's
number.
fine. Yeah, absolutely.
And that is 2020-01448 is the FBI laboratory number.
When there are a series of submissions to the laboratory and a series of requests made, for example, requests being made of the DNA section, requests being made of the latent print section, requests being made, for example, of the trace section, recognizing that there will be a number of reports that are going to be generated, then does each analyst's laboratory report have an additional number that will be attached to that lab number to identify which report it is in the series of total reports generated?
We don't have laboratory report numbers, but I think what you're referring to is the case record number, which is listed here, which is an additional number onto the FBI laboratory number.
Absolutely.
And that number is a different submission comes in and it's assigned to a different discipline. For example, here is 2020-01448, which is the FBI laboratory number, and -3 is the specific case record for this submission specifically for the trace evidence unit.
Does this set forth then the items of evidence that you would have received and would have conducted an analysis of?
Yes.
Okay. Does it also set forth your findings?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit number 45.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 45 will be admitted.
All right. Ms. Onestatter, I'm trying to think of the easiest way to do this. Your Honor, may we publish this?
Excuse me?
May we publish this exhibit?
You may.
All right. I think what we're going to do, first of all, is let's go through and let's identify the various items that came into the laboratory. Now, before we do that, I want to have a discussion so that when the court has an opportunity to go through and review this laboratory report number, the court has some understanding of where items of evidence came from.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. We're dealing with 3 vehicles and an apartment that items of evidence were recovered from. For any item that came into the laboratory, is there an item number that's assigned to it?
Yes,
Okay. I'll have you show me where that appears when we publish the exhibit. Then will there be a description of that item of evidence?
yes,
Okay. And then beyond that, in parentheses, will there be identifiers for that item of exhibit?
yes, there will be.
Okay. And then we'll talk about that. Now, let me take that an additional step. In the course, and if you don't know the answer to this, that's okay. I understand, because I'll cover that through another witness. But in the course of any investigation, are there evidence logs that are generated by each law enforcement agency when an item of evidence is seized and logged into their evidence system and stored?
I am assuming so, but I can't speak for what they do.
That's okay.
But in general, when we receive items of evidence, they will have a contributing agency item number, but the FBI laboratory will assign its own number, a laboratory number as well.
All right. That being said, let's walk through State's Exhibit 45, and then let's discuss what we have.
Okay, finally.
Now, this is just going to be very simple.
Okay.
On our first page, what are our first four item numbers?
Do you want me to just list them off, or
Yes.
the description? Okay. Item 11, item 12, item 13, and item 14.
Is that the lab item number that was assigned?
Yes, those are the FBI laboratory evidence designators.
All right.
Everything in
That
the
being said, in items 11, 12, 13, and 14, is there a description so we know exactly the locations where those items came from?
Yes.
Okay. Item 11, describe it.
Item 11 is a piece of fabric from left shoulder area on front passenger seat of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
I want you to speak to the area where there is a parenthesis.
We know the kid
We
was in
see
the car
a
because
number
he drove her
there
to
that
the
would include
apartment.
lettering as well. That first number, can you explain to us what that is?
That is 1B13, which is the FBI field office designator for that item.
And then by contrast, staying in keeping with this discussion, go down to item 27 in that area where we've got the parenthesis after the descriptor. Do we also see an additional entry beyond the FBI's number that they've assigned?
Yes, it says DPD item number 163.
Okay. And what's your understanding that DPD stands for?
Davenport Police Department.
All right. So with that entry, would that help us to go to look at evidence logs to determine locations where items were seized if we don't have a real exact description as we walk through these items and we don't know, and we won't know where they came from?
I would assume so. I haven't seen such logs, but.
Okay. All right. Item 12. Give us a description for that.
Item 12 is a piece of fabric from middle rear seat of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
13.
Piece of cushion from middle rear seat of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
14.
Rag from driver's console of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
All right. Now let's go through items 14 through 19. Actually, item 20. Are those coming from a specific location as well?
Yes.
Okay. Start at item 14. What is that?
Item 14 is the rag from driver's console of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
Item 15.
Item 15 is the shirt from trunk of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
Item 16.
Item 16 is shorts from trunk of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
Item 17.
Item 17 is a sandal from trunk of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
Item 18.
Item 18 is a sandal from trunk of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
Item 19.
Item 19 is a hatchet from trunk of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
Item 19-1.
Item 19-1 is the blade cover from item 19.
And would that be the blade cover for the hatchet from the trunk?
Yes.
And then item 20.
Item 20 are vacuum sweepings from trunk of 2007 Chevrolet Impala.
Can you give some explanation of what this means? When the evidence recovery team goes out and processes scenes such as vehicles, do they ever use vacuums as a means of collecting potential trace evidence?
Yes, usually it's a vacuum with a special vacuum filter attachment.
Okay. And then so as we look at the descriptor for item 20, is that essentially what would have happened in the trunk when the evidence recovery team was processing the trunk of that Chevy Impala?
Yes.
All right. Let me move this exhibit up so that we continue this discussion. Okay. What are our last two item numbers on State's Exhibit number 45?
Item 27, which is a piece of mattress from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8. And item 28, a piece of mattress from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8.
Okay.
Page
As we look at all of these descriptors, would you agree
Well,
with
they are
me that
thorough.
it gives us the information that we need to understand where these items of evidence were seized from?
Yes.
All right. Now let's go to page 2.
They are thorough with collecting evidence from places we know the kid was. What I'm interested in is evidence of crime, blood, fluids.
Okay.
Oh, there's a lot of it, which is good in
I'd
one
like for
case
you to
because
walk
it's
us
either
through
very
item
damning or
29 through item
irrelevant.
34.
Item 29 is a piece of mattress from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8. Item 30 is a piece of mattress from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8. Item 31, piece of mattress from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8. Item 32, piece of mattress from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8. Item 33, piece of mattress from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8. And item 34, piece of mattress from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8.
Okay. Now let's look at the grouping item 35 through 38. Identify each of those items.
Item 35 is described as a shirt. Item 36, bra. Item 37, underwear. Item 38, washcloth.
When you were looking at these items, had you received any information about children's clothing having been returned to the mother that were contained within a bag of clothing?
I did receive information
Is
that
this
they
wait?
were all in a plastic bag.
Okay.
So this is what the mother brought back. Why are they testing those? What DNA did you find of the girl? Well, of course, it was her clothes. It was her clothes. Why are you testing those? And those weren't collected from the apartment. Remember, the mother took the clothes, went home. Then, a couple of hours later, we need you to bring those back. So whatever happened to them, it was out of sight from, yeah.
And is this something that was subject to DNA analysis by our FBI analyst, Tiffany Smith?
You know, off the top of my head, I cannot remember.
That's all right. But are your item numbers going to be the same as her item numbers?
Yes.
And then so therefore, if she gives us a description where these 4 items came from, then would that location information apply to our item 35, 36, 37, and 38?
Yes.
Okay, now let's continue through the list and let me move it up just a bit. All right, picking up at our next item, item 45.
Item 45, debris from top of foam padding in room D of mobile home, license plate number
That's interesting.
ENJ181. Item 46, debris from under foam padding in room D of mobile home, license plate number ENJ181.
Those are interesting
Item
because
47,
if they found
machete
her
from on
DNA
top
there,
of microwave
now we're
at
talking.
743 Schmidt Road. Item 48, machete. Item 48-1, sheath with item 48, which was the machete.
Okay, and then so 48 and 48-1, are those related to one another?
Yes.
Okay, and then contextually, are they aligned with our next item, number 49? So that gives us some perspective of the location where the machete and the sheath would have come from. Because what do we have in item 49?
Item 49 is a broom from kitchen at 2744 East.
The only thing here I'm interested in, debris from the motorhome. That's the one thing, because everything else, we know she was there. It's if they found her DNA on it from a hair or touch DNA or transfer DNA, we know she was in the apartment.
53rd Street, number 8.
Okay, I'll ask this question. If you don't know the answer to it, that's fine. Were you aware of a machete that had a sheath that was recovered under a mattress in the bedroom at 2744 East 53rd Street, apartment number 8?
Not off the top of my head. I didn't exactly know the exact location. that it was
That's all
recovered.
right, because then I'll have Detective Obert speak to that to fill in the gap there.
That's
All
okay.
right, now,
So far,
let's go
that's
to
the
our
one.
next series.
That's the one testing I'm interested in, is from inside the RV. That's the only one I'm interested in. The rest of it is stuff we know were hers, and we know she was in the same apartment as, which has nothing to do with her actual kidnapping and death.
Of items.
Item 53, shirt.
Okay. And I want to speak to that. Is there any location information there?
There's not listed, no.
But then let's go over to an item number. What is that item number in the parentheses? So we've got the
good catch,
FBI number,
Ms.
but
Sager.
then for our item number that we would associate with the Davenport Police Department, what item number does that give us?
That's is listed as item number 26.
Okay, and so then therefore, would that be information that we would need to collect from one of our detectives out of their evidence log to explain the location of that item?
Yes, you could.
Okay, now let's go to our next series of items.
Item 53 is a shirt from Henry Dinkins.
I'm going to stop you there. And so if there was a shirt that Mr. Dinkins had been wearing and law enforcement collected that from his person, does that comport with that description?
I would assume so, yes.
All right, take us through our next two items.
Item 55 is listed as a shirt from the north bedroom closet.
Is there an item number listed in parentheses that would be associated with the Davenport Police? That was, did you
Okay,
just,
I'm fast forwarding again.
With the
I
DNA,
want to hear
Special
the
Agent
results.
McMillan, from the plastic bag with the other items of evidence, that underwear, that was the plastic bag.
yes, okay. You know what I'm going to do, Your Honor, may I make that correction on this exhibit?
Do you have any objection? I don't. You may make that correction. So
And then what's, oh, hold on, let me turn that around. What is our final exhibit number?
Item 56, shirt from bed.
Okay. And then again, do we have a specific location as to what bed?
No,
Do we have a Davenport Police Report item number so that then we can associate that to its appropriate location?
yes, it's listed as item number 16.
Okay. Did that include all of the items of evidence that were submitted for your analysis?
For my analysis for this particular case record, for this particular submission.
Right. Now, I'm going to jump ahead. Did you actually receive a second submission where you did further analysis?
Yes,
Will that be set forth in a separate laboratory report?
it is.
All right. So then at this point in time, Your Honor, I had introduced State's Exhibit number 45, had I not?
yes.
Okay. All right. At this point in time, then, let's just walk through this. What were you asked to look for with respect to all of these items that had been submitted?
I was requested to perform hair and fiber examinations and comparisons.
And then did you examine all of these items of evidence to see if there was any hairs or fibers that were present?
There were some items were examined and they were all received in the trace evidence unit. They were all, hairs and fibers were all collected, they were processed. Not all examinations were conducted at this time. There were no known hair fiber samples at this time the report was submitted.
Okay. And then when you said that there was no hair, no known hair samples, who would that have involved? Were there any submitted for Mr. Dinkins?
That No, that came in at a later time.
Okay. And then as of the dates that you had generated your report, had they located the body of Breasia Tyrrell?
No.
Okay. Did you perform your analysis in the late summer and early fall of 2020?
I'm sorry, can we go back to your original question about
Yeah.
Fiber and hair exams conducted? I was talking about the hair exams, but I did conduct fiber comparisons on this particular submission.
Okay. All
I just
right.
want to clarify that.
No, and thank you. That makes a lot of sense. So you didn't do any analysis for hairs because you had no known samples. Would that be fair to say?
I did the examination portion on some of that, but not the comparison.
Okay. When you did the examination for the presence of hairs, did you find hairs on any of these items that were submitted?
I did.
What items would that have been?
Can I refer to my results?
Absolutely.
My
Your Honor, may the
report?
witness refer to her results?
Just so the record's clear, I want the witness to tell us which exhibit she's referring to.
It would be this exhibit. I'm sorry, was it number 45?
State's Exhibit number 45.
45.
I have no objection to that.
You may proceed.
Can I refer to a copy of my report that I have up here?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, is there a specific item you're looking for or just the results in general?
Yeah, just the results in general related to locating any potential hair samples.
There was listed on in the results of examination section, third paragraph down starting, one head hair exhibiting African ancestral characteristics was recovered from item 38, which was the washcloth. This hair is suitable for meaningful microscopic comparison purposes and has been preserved on a glass microscope slide. If further microscopic comparisons are requested, please resubmit this evidence along with a known hair sample or samples.
Okay. Now, just to go back, item number 38, is that the washcloth that would have been in the children's bag of clothing?
Yes.
Okay. If through the course of the investigation, it was known that Breasia Tyrrell had been in the apartment at 2744 East 53rd Street, apartment number 8, and she had used that washcloth, then was there any reason for further analysis of that?
I would not think that exam would be important to the case because she was already associated to that washcloth without any further things happening.
Absolutely. And let's just take that a step further. With the child being identified as being present in that apartment, or the child even being identified as being present in a maroon Chevy Impala or the black Camaro, with the child's presence there, if there were hairs of that child that were recovered from either location, does it advance the cause because we have her established presence in those locations?
That is correct. So as I stated before, when I talk about the reason why trace evidence examinations are conducted, I talked about the reason why they're conducted is to establish a possible association between two people or a person and an object. But if there's already association established, then those exams may not be meaningful or needed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Fondin is a common anti-stuttering trick. And if you listen carefully, every time she says to, as in you were going to, you hear her stutter on the T. So that might be it.
Association established, then those exams may not be meaningful or needed.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, now let's go ahead and let's continue with your findings then.
Human body hairs and hair fragments not suitable for meaningful microscopic comparison purposes were recovered from item 14, which was the rag from the driver's console of 2007 Chevrolet Impala, and item 38, which is the washcloth. These hairs have been preserved on glass microscope slides.
Okay, but they weren't suitable for a meaning microscopic comparison.
They were not.
Okay, and so therefore, submitting any known hair samples for either the child or Henry Dinkins would be of no consequence. Would that be fair to say? As it relates to these items?
Correct.
Okay, what are your next findings?
One head hair was recovered from item 45, which was the debris from top of foam padding in room D of mobile home, license plate number ENJ181. And one head hair was also recovered from item 46, which is described as debris from under foam padding of room D of mobile home, license plate number ENJ181.
Okay. Were these collected for future comparison?
It goes on to say that my report that these hairs are suitable for meaningful microscopic comparison purposes and have been preserved on glass microscope slides.
Okay, all right. And then would that require the submission of a known hair sample?
Yes.
All right. What were your next findings relative to hairs?
So moving on, no human hairs were found on item 47, which is the machete from on top of my.
So this witness will probably not testify about the actual result, because at this time, this was only collection and to see, are they suited for comparison? And I bet you money that will go through another witness.
Microwave at 743 Schmidt Road.
Okay. Now I want to talk about that. We're simply addressing the issue that there were no human hairs found on that machete that was recovered on the top of the microwave. Is that correct?
Correct.
Are there going to be different findings, though, related to that machete as we go further through your report when we talk about the fiber analysis?
Yes, the fiber analysis results are listed separately.
Okay, all right. And then what else was noted when you were doing your analysis related to items of evidence for hairs or fibers? Oh, no, at this point, are we turning to the fiber analysis?
Well, there's one more results for the hairs. Moving on down, no hairs or fibers were found on items 19, which was the hatchet. Let's see. Hatchet from trunk of 2007 Chevrolet Impala. Item 19, which was the blade cover from the item 19 hatchet. The 48, which was the machete. And item 48-1, which was the sheath from the item 48 machete.
Okay, let's go back and let's make sure that we understand this. So the hatchet that was taken from the trunk of the maroon Chevy Impala, no hairs on that, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Yeah, the hatchet that was taken from the trunk of the maroon Chevy Impala, no hairs on that.
Correct.
But when we talk about item 48 and 48-1, a machete and a sheath with item 48, there was nothing there as well.
There were no hairs or fibers found.
And this machete is distinctly different from the machete that was found on top of the microwave at 743 Schmidt Road.
It was a completely different item.
All right. And then so item 48 and 48-1 will require some clarification from a detective who testifies so that we understand the location of where that machete and that sheath came from. Would you agree with me there?
Yes.
Okay. Now let's go to your findings related to any types of fibers.
So starting with the first paragraph of the results of examination section of my report, textile fibers of various types and colors were recovered from item 47, which was the machete from on top of the microwave at 743 Schmidt Road. These fibers were compared to known fibers comprising the item 14 rag from driver's console of 2007 Chevrolet Impala and item 38, which was the washcloth.
Okay. And item 38 would be the washcloth in that bag of children's clothing.
Yes.
Okay.
The fibers recovered from item 47 exhibit dissimilar microscopic characteristics or optical properties to the fibers comprising items 14 and 38. And accordingly, these fibers are not consistent with originating from the source of item 14 or 38.
Okay. Now, to be clear, there was no question that there were fibers on that machete on top of the microwave in the RV.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
There is no question that there were fibers on that machete that was recovered from the top of the microwave in the RV, correct?
There were fibers.
All right. In order for there to be fibers then on that machete, what would have to happen?
The machete would have to be in contact with fibers.
All right. Now, when all of these items were submitted to you, for example, the washcloth from the children's bag of clothing, or the other exhibits, let me see, what was that again? Oh, and that would have been the rag from the driver's console of the 2007 Chevrolet Impala. Did you have any information that from an investigative standpoint that either of these were connected to that machete in any way?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
So the washcloth from the children's bag of clothing,
Mhm.
and then that rag that was taken out of the console of the Impala, did you understand whether or not they had any relationship at all with that machete?
They were not from the same scene, but I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking.
Well, and that's a very interesting point that you make. They were not from the same scene, but you still analyzed those to see if the fibers from those two items were consistent with what you saw in the machete. Would that be
Yes.
fair to say?
Mhm.
And there were definitely fibers on that machete, but you don't know what the source of those fibers were. Would that be fair to say?
That is correct.
Okay. And then from there, what else did you conclude as a result of your analysis when you were going through and looking for fibers?
Textile fibers of various types and colors were recovered from items 14, which is the rag from the driver's console of 2007 Chevrolet Impala,
Mhm.
and 38, which is the washcloth. These fibers have been preserved on glass microscope slides.
Okay. All right. And then beyond that, any additional findings related to fibers?
If you move on down to in my report results section, no textile fibers were found on item 45, which were the debris from the top of foam padding in room D of mobile home license plate number ENJ181. And no textile fibers were found on item 46, which is the debris from under foam padding in room D of mobile home license plate number ENJ181.
Okay. Can you tell us about items 45 and 46? Were those examined to determine whether or not they were, in fact, some type of hair?
The specimen, the debris that was collected from items 45 and 46 were examined to determine if it's a hair or if it's a fiber. Let's see, I'm sorry, 40. So as I testified earlier, there was a head hair recovered from item 45 and from 46.
Okay. All right. And were those meaningful for microscopic comparisons?
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, related to the washcloth associated with the children's clothing, was there any type of hair found on that that you could even identify the ancestral characteristics of that hair?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. And for the washcloth that was located with the children's clothing, was there any hair on that item that you could identify an ancestral characteristic?
The item 38 washcloth, as I testified earlier, one head hair exhibiting African ancestral characteristics was recovered from the item 38 washcloth.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Otterstatter, relative to your findings, the finding that the state would focus on would be the findings related to the machete from the top of the microwave that did have fibers on it. And there's no question about that.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, and again, I'm going to go back. The machete from the top of the microwave, that was found in that RV at 743 Schmidt Road, that definitely had fibers on it.
Yes,
Okay.
it had fibers on the machete.
Let me throw this question out, and I don't know if you can answer this, but when you were doing the examination of the machete that was found from the top of the microwave at 743 Schmidt Road, in looking at those fibers, could you offer an opinion as to what those fibers would have been consistent with?
Are you asking for I didn't do any further comparisons, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, no, but when we talked about characteristics of fibers, do various fibers have different characteristics?
They do. To answer your question, I may be able to answer your question, but I need to refer to my case notes for that.
Do you have your case notes with you?
I do have a copy of my case notes if I am approved to examine them. Thanks.
Thank you.
So in my case notes dated July 29th, 2020, from the item 47 machete from on top of the microwave, I have listed that there were textile fibers of various types and colors, including there are numerous 100 plus white cotton type fibers clumped together.
Okay. What would that be associated with then?
I don't know where they came from.
All right, and let me be just a little bit more specific. When we consider paper towels versus considering some type of cloth rag,
I would bet you again that the prosecution wants to speculate on that it was dried off with the multicolored washcloth found in the car.
can you give us a sense of whether or not what you were seeing would come from a product like a paper towel versus a cloth rag?
The numerous 100 plus white cotton fibers would look different than paper fibers, but it is possible that they came from some fabric. I just don't know what that would be.
Okay, so clearly a fabric.
Yeah, these are fibers that would be, comprised of fabric.
Okay, and if a child had testified that that machete was wiped off with some type of cloth, is that
Jesus Christ. They are so desperately wanting to say that the kid is believable. This is so
consistent with your findings?
And also, as far as the white cotton fibers, I mean, it could be any type of fabric or textile, not just a cloth.
Okay, sure, absolutely. All right, thank you. Now, let me direct your attention to State's Exhibit number 46. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's remarked in State's Exhibit 46. May I approach?
You may.
I'm handing you what's remarked as State's Exhibit number 46. Do you recognize State's Exhibit number 46?
I do.
What is State's Exhibit 46?
It's my laboratory report dated September 14th, 2020, and I recognize it by the laboratory number and my signature block.
Would this have been the second report that you generated by virtue of additional submissions that were made?
Yes,
Okay, and does it set forth your findings?
yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit number 46.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 46 will be admitted.
Okay, in this particular case, may I publish this, Your Honor?
You may.
In this particular case, were there some additional submissions of evidence that came in?
Yes.
Okay,
There
and
were.
then for purposes of our record, starting at exhibit number 70 and moving down, or item number 70 and moving down, tell us what the additional submissions were.
There are item 70 is the comb submitted as known sample from Breasia Tyrrell.
And I'm going just to stop you there. At the time that this comb came in, was it believed that hair samples in that comb could have potentially been Breasia Tyrrell's?
Yes, this was again submitted as well. A known hair sample is the ideal known hair sample is taken with hairs pulled from the head directly from the scalp. But this was her known sample was not available, so they submitted an alternate known in the form of a comb, which potentially could possibly have hairs from Breasia Tyrrell to use as an alternate known.
All right. And so to be sure, with a comb in a family home with multiple family members, is there always the possibility that various family members could have used that comb?
That is a potential.
All right. What are our next items of evidence?
Item 71, head hair sample from Henry Earl Dinkins. Item 72, pubic hair sample from Henry Earl Dinkins. Item 73, head hair sample from Andrea Culberson. Item 75, vacuum sweepings from driver's seat and floor in 2012 Chevrolet Camaro. Item 76, vacuum sweepings from front passenger seat and floor in 2012 Chevrolet Camaro. Item 77, vacuum sweepings from rear seats and floor in 2012 Chevrolet Camaro. Item 78, vacuum sweepings from trunk in 2012 Chevrolet Camaro. And item 79, shirt from trunk in 2012 Chevrolet Camaro.
To walk through this, since Breasia was known to have been in the Chevrolet Camaro, were those vacuum sweepings then determined to be of any import? for purposes of analysis.
Can you repeat your question?
Yes, since Breasia Tyrrell had been identified as having been in the Chevrolet Camaro, was there a need to go through and process any of the vacuum sweepings from that vehicle to associate her with that vehicle?
If she was already associated to that vehicle as a passenger, then looking for hair evidence would not necessarily be probative.
Okay. All right. Now that you've got known hair samples for Henry Dinkins, a subject by the name of Andrea Culberson, and then a potential sample that could have been Breasia Tyrrell's, describe what you did in comparing those items to our item 14, the rag from the driver's console, item 20, vacuum sweepings from the trunk of the Chevy Impala, item 4, 45 and 46, and that would be the debris from the top of the foam padding in the RV and under the foam padding.
So the first examination I conducted was to evaluate the item 70, which was the comb submitted as a known sample from Breasia Tyrrell,
Okay.
to make sure that I had a suitable known hair sample for comparison purposes.
Was it suitable?
It was not suitable for comparison purposes. During my examination of, all the debris from the comb was prepared on glass microscope slides, and I examined those microscope slides with that debris. And in my report, it states textile fibers, a wig type fiber, non-human animal hair exhibiting microscopic characteristics consistent with dog, numerous hair fragments exhibiting African ancestral characteristics not suitable for meaningful microscopic comparison purposes, and a few head hairs or portions of head hairs, some artificially treated, were recovered from item 70, which was the comb.
Okay.
Accordingly, these hairs are not suitable to be used as an alternate known head hair sample and were not used for further microscopic comparison purposes.
Okay. And did that essentially conclude what you analyzed when you received the second submission?
Correct.
All right. So with that being said, there would have been no way to compare that to the debris on the foam padding in the mobile home. Would that be fair to say?
Not using that particular alternate known.
Okay. And then finally, Ms. Otterstatter, were you aware of how much time passed before they found the body or the skeletal remains of Breasia Tyrrell?
I am aware that there was some time passed. I'm not aware. I wasn't aware. Well, I don't think her remains were found when I issued my report.
Absolutely. At any rate, with the development of additional information over the course of the investigation and various witnesses that were identified by law enforcement, does the nature of evidence that comes in change the need for certain analysis to be conducted?
Yes, that can happen over the course of an investigation.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Seriously? That's it? She was brought in for the sole purpose of saying, so those fibers you found on that machete could be related to the boy's testimony. That's it. That's it. That's the entirety. Jesus Christ. So many hours wasted. So many hours wasted. This could have been brought in with a conclusionary paper, but the prosecution chose to have her in just so they could possibly make her say, would that be conclusive? Not conclusive, but would that be like the boy's testimony? That's not up to her to decide.
Mr. Freeze, I think that we'll take our afternoon break at this time. I apologize, you will not be able to do your cross-examination at this time, but you will take that up after our break. We'll be
Lunch break. I will continue. What the actual F? The entire morning wasted. The entire morning wasted. Yeah, I can definitely say we are going through the entirety of day 6. Jesus, what a freaking waste of time. Yeah, I mean, the more I hear, do I believe he did it? Yes. Do I believe this prosecution can prove it? No.
Ms. Cunningham, you may proceed.
And Your Honor, the state had concluded its direct examination.
Mr. Freeze.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Ms. Otterstatter, is that right?
Yes.
Thanks. Okay, ma'am, just to kind of summarize what I believe your conclusions have been in this case, you examined a number of items that were sent to you and then performed testing on some items that you were able to test and possibly compare on, I believe, 2 separate occasions, right?
Yes.
And those conclusions, as I understand them, and please correct me if I'm wrong, were not able to connect Henry Dinkins to any items submitted to you at the lab, right?
I did not do a comparison to his known hair sample, so that's correct.
Okay. Was there any trace evidence that connected any of the items you examined to Breasia Tyrrell?
No.
Now, the questions were asked of you about the Camaro. You recall that line of questioning, and Ms. Tyrrell being in the Camaro and Mr. Dinkins being in the Camaro and it not being so important to test those items?
Yes, I remember that.
And as I understand that line of questioning, that was because if we know that those 2 were in the Camaro, trace evidence wouldn't be so important. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes.
Did you know that Breasia Tyrrell and Henry Dinkins had both been in the Camaro when you were asked to test these items?
I believe so.
Because that begs a question with me then, is why were these items even submitted to you for testing?
Which items are you talking about?
Well, anything from the Camaro.
I believe they were more interested to look for evidence in the trunk of the Camaro. But that is it.
Was any trace evidence suitable for examination found in the trunk of the Camaro by you?
I did not examine items from the trunk because I started out with examining the item 70 alternate known hair sample from Breasia Tyrrell, and because that was not suitable for comparison purposes.
No, nothing productive happened. They wasted the entire morning to just try to insinuate by the first witness that, well, you have the fingerprint girl. She found one on the broom. That didn't mean anything. And this poor girl collected samples from everywhere and nothing conclusive. Even worse, they knew there would be hair and fibers from the defendant, his girlfriend, and the girl. So entire morning wasted.
I did not proceed any further with any other exams.
Okay. Item 78 on State's Exhibit 46 are vacuum sweepings from the trunk in the 2012 Camaro. Were those ever tested?
No, because I did not have a suitable known hair sample from Breasia Tyrrell.
Okay, I understand now. After Breasia Tyrrell's remains were found, did you understand that we had hair at that point?
No, I did not. I was not contacted when I did not receive any evidence after Breasia Tyrrell's remains were found.
But after she was found, and let's assume there was hair found at the remains, it is possible then to take that hair and compare it to the evidence that was submitted to you, right?
If there was hairs that were recovered from Breasia Tyrrell's remains, yes, that is possible that I could examine those and potentially use that as an alternate known or a known hair sample from Breasia Tyrrell.
So no one ever submitted any hair samples following the discovery of her remains to you for testing?
No,
And your testimony is those could have possibly been used to compare against, let's say, item trying to remember which one it was. You did have an item of hair that was taken from the mobile home, correct? I believe it was item 45. Strike that, item 38 and exhibit 45.
item 38 was the washcloth, and there was one head hair exhibiting African ancestral characteristics recovered from the item 38 washcloth. So yes, I could have used.
Excuse me, but that's the one that we determined was Breasia Tyrrell's because it was mixed in that plastic bag, right?
I did not determine that hair was Breasia Tyrrell's.
Okay. You also found one head hair from item 46, debris under foam padding in room D of mobile home. Do you see that?
Yes,
And that item was recovered from item 46 and were suitable for microscopic examination, right?
correct.
So we have an item of hair from the mobile home, just so I'm clear, right?
Yes,
And that item is preserved for microscopic examination to this day, right?
correct.
And if we have Breasia Tyrrell's remains that have hair, to this day, we could possibly compare those two to see if Breasia Tyrrell was in that mobile home.
If there are hairs on her remains that are suitable for comparison purposes, yes, that can be conducted.
And no one asked you to do that, did they?
No, sir.
And you and I conducted a deposition about a month ago, right?
Yes,
We did that over the computer, Microsoft Teams or Zoom or something like that, right?
yes.
And I asked you that question then, didn't I?
I don't remember that specific question.
You recall us having a discussion about the same line of questioning about Breasia Tyrrell's hair?
Perhaps.
In the last 30 days, has anyone asked you to compare that hair sample from item 45 to Breasia Tyrrell's hair that was recovered with her remains?
No.
So they
Now,
knew,
there was
the
a line of questioning
prosecution
about the
knew,
Camaro
they
and
chose
if we knew that
not
Breasia was
to
in the
test.
Camaro. That was also applied to the Impala. Recall that?
Yes.
Did anyone tell you that conclusively we knew that Breasia Tyrrell was in that Impala?
I believe so, that she was that she was known to have been in both vehicles.
Let's assume for argument's sake that we don't know she was in that Impala, okay? There are items of trace evidence here, such as item 11, item 12, item 13 on Stacy's exhibit 45, item 20, which are vacuum sweepings, which could have trace evidence that could be compared to the hair that was found with Breasia Tyrrell's remains if they wanted to be compared, right?
Let's see. So you're asking if there's hairs on 11, 12, 13, and 20?
I guess maybe I got ahead of myself. Items 11, 12, and 13, first of all, were there any trace evidence found on those?
There was debris that was collected from those items of evidence, but at that time I had no known hair sample, so I did not conduct an examination on those.
So my question now is, assuming that we don't know Ms. Tyrrell was in that Impala, and we know that 11, 12, and 13 are items that come from that Impala, and knowing now that we have hair from her remains that could be used for comparison, could that be done?
Yes, everything is collected and preserved, and if there are hairs suitable for comparison purposes from her remains, that could be conducted.
Were you ever asked to do that?
No,
Is it fair for me to say that there's no trace evidence in that Impala that places Breasia Tyrrell in that Impala?
well, it would be inaccurate because we just don't know.
Okay, the question then becomes, is it fair for me to say we don't know from the evidence and the testing that you have done that Breasia Tyrrell was in that Impala?
Correct. There's no comparison that was conducted.
And is it fair for me to say that you weren't asked to conduct any comparisons? Right?
You mean after her remains are found?
At any point?
There was a request. However, I didn't have a known hair sample suitable for comparison purposes to do so at that time. And there was no additional samples submitted.
Under the microscope, you're able to tell if fabric has been bleached, right?
I cannot examine fabric underneath a microscope and say that is bleached. No, I can examine it to see if it appears faded, but I can't say that fabric was bleached.
There seems to be a subtle distinction. What would make a fabric become faded?
Well, there could be exposure to sun, for example. Solar bleaching is one way items get bleached. Bleached is another.
Ma'am, are you asked to conduct any analysis or trace evidence on a 9mm SCCY pistol in this case?
I don't believe so, no.
Were you asked to conduct any trace evidence analysis on any ammunition in this case?
No.
Were you asked to conduct any trace evidence analysis on any .38 special revolver in this case?
I don't believe so. Do you have item numbers just to cross-reference?
I don't.
I don't.
If it's not in your report, is it fair to say you didn't analyze it?
That's correct.
There's been some discussion in this case about a baseball bat. Did you analyze any baseball bat for trace evidence?
No.
There's been some testimony about a pocket knife or a small folding hunting knife. I don't see that in your report. Do you recall testing a pocket knife or folding knife for trace evidence?
No, that was not submitted.
Were you asked to test a small kitchen knife for trace evidence?
If it's not in my report, I didn't examine it.
Who made the decision to submit these items to you for analysis?
That I'm not exactly sure. The contributor was Special Agent James McMillan of the Omaha Field Office with FBI.
You had hair samples from Mr. Dinkins, did you not?
Yes.
You had hair and pubic hair?
Yes.
And you're able to compare those against anything that was submitted to you?
Which items are you specifically asking about?
Any item.
That was not compared because many of the items were from places that he was known to have been.
Okay. That's all I have.
Ms. Cunningham.
Yes, thank you. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing counsel what's been marked as States Exhibits 9-9 and 9-10. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Ms. Otterstadt?
Oh, hi, folks. No, go back
It's 9-9 and 9-10.
an hour and a half.
I'm really just using this for purposes of foundation, and I would represent that we'll introduce this to a later witness. As you look at these,
Hold on. We are 5:16. Let's see where she went. No, where is this lady? 5:16.
Ms. Brillhart, what are
Yeah.
latent fingerprints?
So on the palmar surfaces of your hand, as
What's
well
your
as the soles
verdict?
of your feet, there are raised portions of skin known as friction ridges. And those friction ridges exude sweat. So when you touch an item, you may leave an impression of that friction ridge arrangement on the item. Many times latent prints are not visible to the naked eye. So they require different light sources, chemicals, or fingerprint powders to be able to visualize them.
So when you are provided an item in your lab with the goal of trying to see if there's any sort of latent fingerprints or friction ridges on that item.
Yeah. All right. Let's go back to 5:16 there. All right.
Large knife or machete.
okay. And
Yeah.
was that the large knife or machete that you noted that there were trace fibers on?
What can you tell me what?
Oh, she keeps trying to say that these trace fibers, or they could come from when he was wiping off a bloody machete, as the kid testified to. This is such a stretch, not even the Fantastic Four would make it believable.
The FBI item number is.
And absolutely, I will. And let's go to your report, going to item number 47,
My eye hurts.
which would be your item 47, and then the FBI item number being 1 capital B 54.
Okay.
Does that appear to be item 47 that you would have received and then analyzed for trace evidence consisting of fibers?
That item 47 was received in the trace evidence unit. I personally was not the one that examined it. We have our physical scientists that do all of the collection, and I am the one that received the microscope slides for examination purposes.
Okay, let's just go ahead and lay some foundation. So then when these items of evidence come to your unit, is there essentially a two-tier process to this, or a two-step process?
There is the processing or collection of hairs and fibers from the item of evidence, and then the hairs and fibers any hairs and fibers collected from the evidence are prepared on glass microscope slides for examination purposes. That could be like step 1, for example, and then once those hairs and fibers collected are mounted on microscope slides, then I receive those slides and examine it using the methods I testified earlier to.
All right, let's approach that question in a different way. When you looked at States Exhibit 9-9 and 9-10, did that appear to be a large machete?
Yes.
Just based on what you could see with the naked eye, could you see some type of trace evidence consistent with fibers on that machete?
I'm going to object at this point. She's talking about a photograph that's not been admitted into evidence yet.
Your
Is
Honor,
appropriate?
Your Honor, it's simply laying foundation for testimony that will be authored through Detective Patrick Siebert. And this is really more illustrative of the point that I'm trying to make, if anything.
Then that's the time to ask this question is after Siebert testifies and this item's in evidence.
Your Honor, this
Approach,
witness
please.
has to get on an airplane, and so,
Approach, please.
sure.
This, what? What an, oh, we're over 2 hours. Clusterfuck. Nobody cares if she has to be on an airplane. No one. You have had her on the stand for most of the morning and a bit of the afternoon, and now you're in a rush? Now she has to be on a plane? Now? You had all morning to lay the foundation. All morning. This is not the court's fault. This is not the defense fault. This is your fault. And you could have had her on Zoom or anything. Jesus Christ, what a clusterfuck this is. I mean, seriously. Seriously. You're trying to get evidence in and an opinion in you have no foundation for. You're trying to have it included beforehand, before you call the correct witness. Yes, Thierry, the prosecution planned this so they could use that excuse in order to have invalid testimony. Let's move forward and listen to what the judge decides. Mother freaker.
I'm going to sustain the objection at this time. Ms. Cunningham, please rephrase.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. It's just a very simple question that I want to ask you. If there is a physical object, and there's some item that is utilized with that physical object, across that physical object.
Are you trying to get it in as a hypothetical? Jesus Christ, no. You have soon wasted an entire day on crap.
can it leave behind fibers?
Can you
Okay, all
answer
right.
that or
Yeah,
ask me
so
that
I'm going to
again? I'm
rephrase
sorry.
again. So take a physical object. If there is a rag that's wiped along a physical object, can that rag deposit fibers on that physical object?
Yes,
All right. And then would those fibers be something that can be seen with the naked eye?
potentially.
Okay.
Maybe, maybe
and
not.
huh?
Maybe not.
Okay.
That's
but-
why we use low magnification microscopes when examining things such as machetes.
But there is a possibility that there could be fibers that are obvious.
Oh, I know what's going to happen with that cop. She's trying to lay a foundation to that cop can actually testify to. I saw fibers that was, I think, was close to the rag. That means that the boy was right. Oh, Jesus Christ.
To the naked eye. Would that be fair to say?
Yes,
All right. Now, you indicated that you did not receive a baseball bat in. Is that correct?
correct.
You indicated that you didn't receive a pocket knife in. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You indicated you did not receive a kitchen knife.
Correct.
All right. And so then at the point of collection of those items, do you know whether or not officers examined them to see if there was anything on those objects that would merit submission to the laboratory? Can you speak to that issue at all?
I can't speak to that issue.
Okay. Would you agree with me that in the course of an investigation, when officers are collecting items of evidence, they consider the circumstances and their observations of those items to determine whether or not it is an item that they believe should be submitted for analysis?
I can't speak to their thought process.
Okay.
But yes, I know that when they collect something, they decide at that point whether or not to send it to the laboratory.
Okay. Now, let me take that just a step further. You had been asked if you had received a .38 special revolver for purposes of analysis. Was there a .38 special revolver?
No.
Okay. If an item, a physical object, had been recovered from a body of water, would that seems to be a likely object to?
Why are you referring to that body of water? That gun was from the home. This is hypotheticals. Jesus Christ.
Submit for any type of trace evidence analysis.
We have received items like that before.
Okay. But again, then, does it come down to the investigator and what it is that they note during the course of their contact with that object?
Yes.
Okay. And then finally, with respect to the SCCY 9mm semi-automatic pistol, again, with that object, did you receive that object?
No.
Okay. And then I will speak to this. Do you even know the location of where that was recovered from?
I have no knowledge of that item.
So therefore, we have to consider the knowledge of the investigators at the time that they found these objects, which would form the basis of decisions made to the FBI laboratory. Would that be fair to say?
I'm not sure I'm one to answer that question, to be honest.
That's okay. That's all right. Now, another thing that I want to talk about, just for purposes of our record, when counsel referred to items 11, 12, and 13 on your lab report, was that the sections of fabric taken from the maroon Chevy Impala?
11, 12, and 13?
Yes.
Those are pieces of fabric from the different parts of the Impala, yes.
Okay. There was a question about whether or not, or what kind of...
Yes, from her remains. They know she was shot.
how bleach would affect fabric. And what was your answer to that?
I testified that I cannot examine a piece of fabric and say definitively that is bleached.
Okay. Now, just as a matter of common experience, though, if bleach is applied to fabric or upholstery, what does it tend to do to the color of the fabric or upholstery?
Well, bleach tends to fade or make the colors lighter,
Okay.
depending on what type of bleach you use.
And then you had mentioned the topic of solar fading. Give us an idea of what you mean by solar fading.
Solar fading is when fabric is exposed. So if we all have purchased new clothing, so it's nice and bright, new,
Mhm.
and then solar fading can happen when the
Please, folks, consider becoming a member if you're not. That's $3 a month and keeps this channel afloat. Or gifting memberships. Just an idea. Thank you.
Fabric or fibers have been exposed to the sun over a period of time, and it looks faded or lighter, or it changes the color somewhat.
Let's take that and let's apply that concept to a vehicle. Now, if you have a vehicle that doesn't have any tint to the windows, would it be fair to say that that fabric is going to be exposed?
Marcus Alexander, that has not been testified to yet in this trial. This is day 6, and we are still not at the point where they are testifying to what was actually found on the remains. Just that they were found, they were a bit scattered, they found her clothing on or nearby, and that she was shot. That's it. That's what we know, but nobody has actually testified to the cause of death yet. Day 6 in this trial. There's so much unnecessary shit in this trial. It's embarrassing.
To sunlight coming in through the windows of the vehicle.
Yes, that's fair to say.
And
Depending on the sun and the location of how the vehicle is parked and all those factors.
okay, and then relative to the topic of solar fading, then, if there has been solar fading to the upholstery, would you expect that fading to be consistent across a broad area of the fabric versus like maybe small square patches in a section of fabric?
I would expect that the solar fading would be where the sun is exposing, or where the fabric is exposed to the sun.
Okay, thank you so much.
Damn, this prosecutor is so desperate for anything. You know, that what she asked this witness about, she could have had a different witness who actually tried the circumstances. Instead, she's trying to get it in as an hypothetical. What the fuck?
I have no further questions. Oh, no, I do have one other question. Did you make a determination about the ancestral characteristics of the hair that would have been collected from the foam padding in the mobile home? And I would direct you to item 45 and 46 in State's Exhibit number 45. And then that would also be true in State's Exhibit number 46.
Did you say item 45 and 46?
Yes.
I didn't include that in my report of examination.
Ha! I mean, seriously, this is so redundant. I almost said another R word.
I am referring to my notes, if that's okay, for item 45 and 46. Item 45, the head hair has a little bit more information about it, if you'd like me to read my notes.
Could you please?
It says 1 head hair, approximately 4¼ inches in length, broken at root end, appears are artificially treated, appears dyed dark black, rendering hair nearly opaque. Hair is coarse with patchy pigment. Cuticle appears dyed, potentially stripped, and perhaps a wig type hair.
Okay, thank you.
Wig?
I have no further questions.
Mr. Freeze?
Ma'am, item 47 on State's Exhibit 45, the machete from the top of the microwave. Did you physically lay eyes on that object?
I did not process that item, no.
Okay, so any analysis you did was simply looking at a slide with any items of trace evidence that was provided to you, right?
Correct.
So you're relying on someone else's collection of that item.
Yes.
Very well, thank you. Nothing further.
The state has no further questions.
You may sit down.
Let's see here. When did she enter? Just over an hour in, she sat down. We are now at 5:30, so 4 hours minus lunch. 4 hours, and that's it. nothing. She was only brought in for the prosecution to make the insinuation that fibers found on the machete could come from a rag, that the kid who testified might not have lied his fucking teeth out about. This is such a waste of time. I mean, we are 6 days in, and my evaluation of the circumstantial evidence is that they should be able to exclude everybody else to be able to get to a possible conviction of Henry Dinkins. But the more I hear from the prosecution, the less I think they can actually prove it. Motherfricker. This poor FBI agent.
Your Honor, the state calls FBI analyst Tiffany Smith to the stand.
I bet you Tiffany is blonde. But let's see. Dun dun dun! Ha! Told you! Sorry. A blonde Tiffany. What are the odds?
Would you please stand to be sworn in, please? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please have a seat.
Please state your name for the record and spell.
Circumstance. His actions that morning, the testimony from the ex-girlfriend, the location he traveled to, locations, the cell phone data, the amount of time it took from him to drive, how it resembles why did he go out of town to buy bleach when he could have used the Costco or almost at Marvel, Walmart nearby. His actions are extremely suspicious. That makes me believe we can it's more exclude everybody else than go into, by definition, prove it's him. But I was expecting more out of the trace evidence. I must say that. I was expecting much more from the trace evidence. Yeah, the morning he supposedly is out searching for the girl, he went to the next town over to buy bleach. Melissa says, does anyone know if he went to other stores, but they were out of bleach? But why was he buying bleach when he was supposed to be looking for the kid, for Breasia? That's the interesting thing. He supposedly, according to what he said to the officer, he'd drive around looking for her, then he took his son and looked some more.
Your first name.
My name is Tiffany Smith, spelled Tiffany.
What is your occupation?
I'm a forensic examiner in the DNA casework unit of the FBI laboratory.
How long have you been employed with the FBI?
Since August of 2010.
Can you describe your prior educational background?
Yes, I have a bachelor's of science degree from West Virginia University in forensic and investigation.
I have to apologize a bit because I need to go do something. I'll be right back. Hi. Sorry for that, but nature called. All right, let's see what Tiffany has to say.
Investigative Sciences, and I have a Master's of Science degree also from West Virginia University in biology
When did you complete your formal education?
in 2010.
Once you completed your formal education, did you have prior employment before coming to the FBI?
No, I was hired by the FBI laboratory directly after graduate school.
Okay. Upon being hired, what unit were you assigned to?
I was assigned to the DNA casework unit, formerly known as the nuclear DNA unit.
All right. And so has your entire career been focused on DNA analysis, essentially?
Yes, that and body fluid identification.
Can you describe the training that you've received involving DNA analysis?
Yes, so when I was hired by the FBI laboratory in August of 2010, I went through a 1.5-year training program. And in that training program, I performed the same job duties that I currently perform. However, I was under the direct supervision of qualified analysts. This included determining which items to test, directing a team of biologists to perform that testing, reviewing the results of that testing, writing reports that were then reviewed by qualified analysts. I also went through a series of oral board exercises and moot court examinations. And I also worked in the laboratory on mock items of evidence so that I could understand the practices and procedures done by the biologists.
Okay. And following even that initial training, do you go through regular training or go through regular coursework throughout your career with the FBI?
Yes, after that initial training was complete, we do something called
You might be
continuing
a cat,
education,
but
and that is
ring
requirements that we do
on the
every
left
single
ring
year.
finger.
We are
Was she
required to have a
already-
certain amount of hours every year, and that could include going to conferences, presentations, reading scientific journals or articles, things of that nature.
What is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it is our hereditary material. We receive half of our DNA from our mother and half from our father, and it controls not only what we look like, but also all the chemical processes going on within our body.
Where is DNA found?
It is found within our cells, and our bodies are made up of trillions of cells, and this could include blood cells, sperm cells, tissue cells, or like muscle cells, skin cells, and the DNA found within these cells is identical throughout your body.
How do you examine items to determine whether DNA is present in an item?
It depends on the item. We may first conduct serology, which is body fluid identification on that item to try to find areas with potential cells. Body fluids contain many, many cells. We may also just swab or cut an item of evidence to try to collect possible skin cells or any other cells that may be present. So we typically do a swabbing or a cutting from an item of evidence and then do the rest of the DNA extraction procedure.
And when you are swabbing and cutting areas for DNA analysis, does that involve some type of examination with the naked eye to identify locations that appeared to be, I'm going to say different, but I'm sure you can describe it a little bit better than what I'm doing with my question?
Yes, again, it depends on the item of evidence. So our biologists would be instructed to, depending on the item, either look for staining that might be present. So for instance, if we are testing an item for blood, the biologist would first look for any red-brown staining that might be present on that item, and then conduct the swabbing or cutting from the item if there is red-brown staining being present. If we are trying to
Jackpot Springs asks, any possibility that a kid shot her and everyone is trying to cover for him? There's no evidence of that. So, but I honestly wouldn't rule it out. Because the state's case is not, so far, it's not only weak, it's non-existent, except for those really strange circumstantial evidence that I believe, if done correctly, would make a possibility of a conviction. But this prosecution is doing everything they can to make me think that this guy had nothing to do with it.
get skin cells, you don't really, you can't see those. So you would potentially swab textured areas or areas that come in direct contact with an individual's skin. Or for like a water bottle, you would swab the mouth of the water bottle because that's how a water bottle will typically be used.
Now, then what steps do you take to process DNA samples from an item?
So the first thing I would do is come up with an exam plan. And an exam plan is just a list of what I would like tested in the case. I would then direct my team of biologists to perform that testing. For DNA testing, the first step is the collection. That's where you're swabbing or cutting from an item of evidence to try to capture those cells that contain DNA. Those cuttings or swabbings are then put into a tube, a sterile tube, that chemicals and heat are added to that item to break open those cells, releasing the DNA. This also purifies the DNA by removing all the other cellular components, such as proteins or lipids, for instance. Once the DNA is purified, we quantify the amount of DNA that we are able to obtain. This just tells us roughly how much DNA we were able to obtain from the sample. Next, we go through an amplification process. And this is where just the regions of DNA that differ among individuals, or what we are specifically looking at, go through a copying process. Over 99% of our DNA is the same. There's only 1% that differs among individuals. So we focus on a small portion of that and make millions upon millions of copies of those differences. Lastly, the DNA is run through an instrument that separates the DNA out by size. And this, in essence, generates what we call a DNA profile, which is going to be a snapshot of what an individual's DNA is at the locations that we test. And we do this for both evidence and known samples.
All right. Now, how would you compare DNA found on an item of evidence to the known DNA of an individual?
So we would first do that same process on both an evidence item and a known sample to generate DNA profiles. The first thing I would do is look at the item of evidence to interpret the results. And that's before looking at the known sample. I would first determine, is that DNA made up of male DNA, female DNA, or a mixture of both? I would then look to see if the DNA originated from one individual or multiple individuals. If it is multiple individuals, that would be called a mixture. Then, after that is done, I will compare the known sample to that evidence profile to see if the results are the same or if they are different. If they are different, then I state that that individual could be excluded as a contributor, meaning their DNA was not detected on that item. If the DNA from the item of evidence is the same as the DNA from a known individual, I state that that individual is included or cannot be excluded as a possible contributor. And then I would calculate something called a likelihood ratio, which just provides a statistic that compares the probability of observing the DNA evidence.
If you ever rewatch the Zachariah Anderson case, remember how she testifies to how they calculate DNA evidence and how the so-called expert in the Zachariah Anderson case actively avoided this. We don't know yet. I'm hoping this FBI agent will bring us some clarity. The previous witness, also an FBI agent, spent 4 hours in total, and it brought us absolutely nothing.
Under two alternate explanations.
Okay. Now, what is it about the DNA strand where you can determine whether it belongs to a male versus a female?
As part of our testing process, we have 3 locations on the DNA that are sex determining regions. So for instance, males have a Y chromosome, whereas females do not. And so some of these sex typing locations are found on the Y chromosome. So you would expect to see DNA results at those locations if the sample is from a male. If the sample is from a female, you would not expect to see those results.
Okay. Now, you had indicated that there can be situations where there are multiple individuals' DNA on an item of evidence. In that situation, are there limitations to your ability to be able to identify who the DNA belongs to relative to all of those contributors?
It's possible at the FBI laboratory, we interpret mixtures up to 4 individuals. So if the sample has 5 or more individuals, we no longer do comparisons for those. However, if the DNA is 4 or less, I can still do comparisons and still reach the same conclusions, an inclusion or an exclusion.
Okay. Now, going back to the issue of quantification, do you need to have a certain amount of characteristics associated with an individual's DNA to make a positive identification?
So for the quantification step, we do need to have enough DNA present to generate a DNA profile. However, at the FBI laboratory, we do not require a certain number of locations to be detected in order to do comparisons. We will do comparisons no matter what results we get.
I'd like to go back to an earlier comment that you had made when you were talking about your examination plan. You indicated that you are going to be making decisions about what items to select for DNA testing. Can you explain what you mean by that and what would make certain items of evidence suitable for testing, whereas other items of evidence not suitable for testing?
Sure. So it will depend on the case. So based off the case scenario, some items may be probative to find DNA from an individual. Other items may not be informative. So for instance, if we know that an individual was in a specific location, we don't necessarily need to do DNA testing to try to place them in that location. We also would start our testing on the most intimate items first, depending on the case scenario. So we would do the items most closely associated with a person and then move outward.
All right. Now let's talk about places where an individual is known to be located. In the course of an investigation, if law enforcement, for example, was trying to identify the location of a child that had come up missing, through the course of that investigation, if there had been statements collected that would place a child in specific locations, then are you going to be interested in processing items of evidence from that to establish that child's presence at a specific location?
No, not necessarily. If we know that the child was alleged to have been in that location, there's no question on that, then I would not need to do DNA testing in those locations.
Are you familiar with an investigation that was initiated by the Davenport Police Department on July 10th of 2020 involving a child by the name of Breasia Tyrrell who was missing and a subject of interest identified as Henry Dinkins?
Yes, I am.
How are you familiar with this case?
I was assigned to this case as the DNA examiner.
Okay. What field agents were you working with there at the FBI laboratory?
Special Agent Cameron Smith, as well as Special Agent James McMillan directly. Those are who I had the most contact with.
All right, Special Agent Smith has been here in court and has testified. There was a topic of conversation that I would like to speak with you about. Through the course of the investigation, there were a number of items of evidence that were collected. Decisions were made about specific items to be submitted to the laboratory for testing, whether it be DNA, latent prints, or even trace evidence. Special Agent Smith indicated that they received guidance, field agents received guidance from individuals at the laboratory. Can you explain that process so that we understand how that plays into what items are selected to go to the laboratory?
Sure. So again, depending on the case, especially if there's a short deadline, in this case, it was submitted to our laboratory as an expedite. And when you have a lot of items of evidence, you want to send the most probative or most informative items to the laboratory first to initiate the testing, because if you send everything all at once, you may bog down the system and slow the testing down, especially because at the laboratory, we are not part of the investigation. We don't know the case circumstances. So therefore, we just want to inform them to send the items that they believe would be the most informative for testing first, and we could always receive additional items later.
Given the variables of this investigation, were we working with a number of different locations?
Yes, we were.
Okay. Would that have involved a maroon Chevy Impala?
I do not know the color, but I did have listing a Chevy Impala, yes.
How about the address of 2744 East 53rd Street, apartment number 8?
Yes, that was another location.
An address of 743 Schmidt Road where a motorhome was parked.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. A DNA that was collected from a subject identified as Henry Dinkins.
Yes, that is correct.
And then also a plastic bag that was known to contain clothing of Breasia Tyrrell and her younger brother.
We did have a bag of clothing. That is correct.
All right. Now, did you have known DNA there that you were working with at the lab?
Yes, we did.
Whose known DNA were you working with?
So I had received a known DNA sample from Mr. Henry Dinkins. I received a known DNA sample from Miss Andrea Culberson. And then I received an alternate known originally from Miss Tyrrell, which was a toothbrush. Later, it was determined that the DNA profile obtained from that toothbrush did not, in fact, contain Miss Tyrrell's DNA. So therefore, I used a known DNA profile that was provided to me from a different agency, LabCorp.
Okay. Does LabCorp do paternity testing?
It does, yes.
Okay. And then so had there been paternity testing relative to the child of Breasia Tyrrell?
From my understanding, yes, because I had received a report from LabCorp that contained paternity test results for Miss Tyrrell, and it had her DNA profile in that report. And that is what I ended up using for my comparisons.
And let's just speak to this issue so that this is.
Okay, so after a while, they concluded, okay, nothing of the samples actually had the Breasia Tyrrell's DNA, but apparently her parentage was contested. As in Henry said, I don't know if that's my kid, but apparently it was. No, not Henry, sorry. There was a between Breasia's mother and the potential father. There was contest. We don't know the result of that because maybe there was alternate possible fathers. We don't know. But in that, they received the DNA from Breasia Tyrrell. Finally, we have her actual DNA. So let's see.
Addressed on the record with the toothbrush. Was that an early submission to the laboratory?
Yes, when we received our first submission, the toothbrush was part of that submission. It was actually given item 1. That was told to me that it was a known or alternate known sample from Miss Breasia Tyrrell. So that was what I used originally.
Okay. When you were able to get records from LabCorp that had Breasia Tyrrell's known DNA, what did you discover?
I discovered that the DNA profile between the toothbrush and Miss Tyrrell was different and that the profile was more consistent with her mother.
All right. Let's speak to this particular topic. Going back to DNA, you had indicated that a child gets half of their DNA from the mother and half of the DNA from the father.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Now, how would you describe the DNA of an individual that they get from their mother?
You would share 50% of the DNA between a child and a mother.
And is that the mitochondrial DNA that we're talking about?
No, this would still be the nuclear DNA, which is the type of DNA testing I conducted. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down intact from mother to child, so those would actually be identical. I am not a mitochondrial DNA examiner. I strictly do nuclear DNA.
All right, and that's where you're just identifying the individual specific DNA. Is that correct?
That is correct, because for nuclear DNA,
I'm getting the notion that this prosecutor knows what questions to ask, but she's not entirely sure about the answer, which is inherently stupid. Never ask questions you don't know the answers to, as in this case. I mean, seriously, prosecutor, get a fucking grip.
DNA is unique with the exception of identical twins.
Okay. Once you made that discovery, then did you go through and redo your analysis?
I did, yes.
And then the report that we're going to be talking to today, would that have been a second report you authored once you'd received the known DNA of Breasia Tyrrell through documentation of LabCorp?
Yes, my second report superseded my first report, so my first report no longer is applicable. The second report is the official report that outlines all of the comparisons between Ms. Tyrrell and the items tested.
And then I want to speak to yet another issue. Did you author a third report as well?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, as to that third report, Andrea Culberson and her DNA, did it come in later on in the early stages of the investigation?
Yes, originally the only sample, the true known I had was from Mr. Dinkins. Later on, I received a sample from Ms. Culberson.
All right. Your Honor, may the record reflect that I'm showing
That is
counsel what's been
because
marked
the
as State's
kid-
Exhibit number 52.
I can bet again that the reason Andrea had to submit her DNA was that the kid accused both Henry and Andrea for shooting Breasia, which was later on concluded Andrea had nothing to do with this by the prosecution. Nothing.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I'm handing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 52. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 52 for purposes of identification?
I do. I'm sorry, it's a copy of my report.
All right. And then what date did you author this report?
August 13, 2020.
What is the official title that appears at the top of this document?
FBI laboratory, well, it's the laboratory report.
All right. And then does it identify who the field agent was that was responsible for submissions that came to you?
It does. It has Mr. Cameron, or excuse me, Special Agent Cameron Smith.
All right. And then if you could give us the case ID number for the FBI.
The FBI case ID is OM-3290265.
And then the lab number that would have been associated with this report to include which report this was.
Yes, the laboratory report for this specific report is 2020-01448-19.
Does it list a name in the area of subject for subjects of interest?
It does. It lists Henry Earl Dinkins.
And then is the child's name Breasia Tyrrell on this document as well?
Yes, it is.
And does it identify the specific discipline that this report applies to?
It does. It lists DNA.
In addition, does this also include descriptions for every item of evidence that was submitted to the laboratory for you to analyze?
It is not every item that was submitted. It was every item that I tested in our unit specifically.
And thank you for that clarification. And then finally, do you set forth your results in this document?
Yes, I do.
And then does your name appear on this document as the author of this report?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 52.
No objection.
Exhibit 52 will be admitted.
Your Honor, may I publish State's Exhibit 52?
You may.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and give you a copy, and then I'm going to utilize Elmo to work with this exhibit so that we can see what's going on here. Okay. All right. Now, to start off on your report, what I'd like for you to do, we're just going to go through a list of items submitted. I will tell you for purposes of perspective, we've already provided an education for a written record as to how numbering of items work in that left column. All right. As we understand it, the item numbers in the left column were established by who?
By the FBI laboratory.
And then, of course, we've had discussions relative to each descriptor for an item of evidence, the area where there is quotes and we see numbers. Are we correct in
need to
understanding that like
myself.
1B61 would be the FBI number?
Yes, that would be provided from the field.
Okay. And then if we go to the end of that very first entry, item number 26 would be the item that the Davenport Police Department assigned to that evidence when it was seized.
That is correct.
Okay.
I'm going to write a poll question. Do you think any of the testings leads to a conclusion that Henry that Breasia was in the RV? Yes. No. A bit misspelling, but let's go on.
When items are seized by Davenport and turned over to the FBI, does
Stop it. It's been It's been going so great all this time. Come on.
The FBI then give it its own item number.
Yes,
So essentially, we're working with 3 item numbers.
yes, that is correct.
All right, walk us through this then. Let's start with the very first item. And actually what I want you to do, let's go ahead and let's just start reading through those. And as you go through those, I'm going to have some questions along the way.
Sure. And normally, just to clarify,
Okay, now we are into that when YouTube decides and streamer decides to stop speaking to each other for a bit. This is how I solved it yesterday. I'm just going to restart everything, so I will be gone for 30 seconds. I'll be right back. I'm back. Let's see if we can get this correct as well. Dun 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 dun. Dun. Add to stream. Sound, sound, sound. Pause. Wait a second. Wait a second. Stop.
So essentially, we're working with 3 item numbers.
yes, that is correct.
All right, walk us through this then. Let's start with the very first item. And actually what I want you to do, let's go ahead and let's just start reading through those. And as you go through those, I'm
Hold on, I'm switching. Okay, that didn't work. I'm switching between router to phone. Marcus says, I'm not getting a clear and concise presentation of credible evidence establishing a coherent theory of the case. Instead, they are throwing mud, hoping agnostics. I would agree. Let me refresh that page. Seriously, StreamYard? Come on.
FBI then give
All right. Let's hope this works.
it its own item number.
Yes,
Oh, for fuck's sake. This should have worked. Oh, let me say, I have to check the activity here. Memory. Close that down. Come on. What am I missing here? Oh, great. Anti-malware. Oh, that's a pain in the fucking neck. Bear with me. I'm trying to close that down.
So essentially, we're working with 3 item numbers.
Yes, that is correct.
Sorry. Okay, not. Let me go back to the router and hope that that works. Router on, start.
Let's do this then. Let's start with the very first item. And actually, what I want you to do, let's go ahead and let's just start reading through those. And as you go through those, I'm going to have some questions along the way.
Sure. And normally, just to clarify, we do list the item numbers in order, but because I had that superseding report, the first 4 numbers were new items that had not been previously listed in my first report. That's why they are listed first.
Oh, come on, for freak's sake.
And Ms. Smith, something that you did in your laboratory report that was very helpful. You got these descriptions by item numbers, but then as you go through and talk about the results of your
We've been doing
analysis,
so great the
do you
entire
give
day.
us a general heading of where these items of evidence came from so that we know where?
Okay. Let's try something else. Let's move to Chrome. Okay, okay, okay. I'm closing my Okay, here we go. Here we try. Let's go again. Present, share screen, share screen. This one. Sound. Add to stream. Let's try again.
Had that superseding report. The first 4 numbers were new items that had not been previously listed in my first report. That's why they are listed first.
And Ms. Smith, something that you did in your laboratory report that was very helpful. You got these descriptions by item numbers, but then as you go through and talk about the results of your analysis, do you give us a general heading of where these items of evidence came from so that we know where to associate that?
Jesus Christ, it's been working good all day, and I have no issues
as far as
with I have absolutely no issues with my internet. It is on full broadcast. Why are you fucking with me now?
Are concerned.
I did, yes.
Okay, all right, go ahead and take us through this set of item numbers.
So item 53 was a shirt from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8. Item 54 was a shirt listed as coming from Henry Dinkins.
I'd like to speak to that topic. Does that mean that that was an item that was taken directly off of Henry Dinkins?
That's what I would assume, but again, I don't know because I didn't do the collections myself.
Sure.
That was just how it was described to us when we received it at the laboratory.
Go ahead.
We received item 55, which was a shirt from a plastic bag. Item 56, which was a shirt from bed from 2744 East 53rd Street, number 8.
And then as to item 55, as we go through your findings, are you going to give us more information about the plastic bag and that shirt so we know who it is associated with?
I will give results from the testing on that shirt, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
The next is item 1, which was the toothbrush submitted as a known sample from Ms. Tyrrell. Item 2 was penile swabs from Mr. Henry Dinkins. Item 3 was a left hand swab from Mr. Dinkins. Item 4 was a right hand swab for Mr. Dinkins. Item 5 and 6 were
Jesus Christ, why are you doing this? Everything was working fine. Let's try to go back to Edge. And I'm closing Chrome down. See you in a bit. Hello again. Present, share screen. Dun dun dun. Sound up. Full screen. Add to stream. Okay, let's try again. Oh, for fuck's sake. This can't be real. Everything was working fine. Everything was working fine. Everything was working some fine. No, Angst Kitten, you didn't miss anything except that StreamYard stopped talking to YouTube and it fucks up.
toothbrush submitted as a known sample from Ms. Tyrrell.
Let's check. I mean, everything is doing fine when I check it.
Item 2 was penile swabs from Mr. Henry Dinkins.
Let's swap again from router to phone, which it can't find all of a freaking sudden.
Item 3 was a left hand swab from Mr. Dinkins.
You have to be fucking kidding me. Is the universe saying it's time to bed? Okay, now I am on phone, but the phone Wi-Fi sucks. But let's refresh.
I will give results from the testing on that shirt, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
The next is item 1, which was the toothbrush submitted as a known sample from Ms. Tyrrell. Item 2 was penile swabs from Mr. Henry Dinkins. Item 3 was a left hand swab from Mr. Dinkins. Item 4 was a right hand swab for Mr. Dinkins. Item 5 and 6 were the left and right hand fingernail swabs from Mr. Dinkins. Should we continue
I
to
don't
the
care
next
about
page?
and then let me
picture
go
as
ahead
long
and
as we
turn
have
the next
sound.
page.
So I moved it down to 144p, but it doesn't matter. All right. I guess we have to listen to the universe and continue tomorrow. Damn it. things was going so well. I thought we were going to be done by day 6. Jenny, I'm so glad. I'm glad I don't have to swab penile for a living. Yeah. All right. I guess we have to listen to the universe. How boring that might be. And we will continue tomorrow. Oh, yeah. It's not much I can do about it. But let's see here. Yeah, I will send you off to the alternate corner, who is doing a rewatch of the Zachariah Anderson case for you who missed that. So yeah, you all tell him I sent you. Thank you all for being with me this entire day. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. And I see you all tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.